Chapter 535. In the field, Yilan just stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's expression was calm and he did not say a word. After a while Yilan asked, "Yi Xian, are you really willing to give up on that treasure?" Yi Xian smiled, "I'm not willing, but what else can I do? Now that I have that treasure, only death awaits me, don't you think so?" Yilan calmly replied, "You seem to understand." Yi Xian replied in a low voice, "I have no other request, I just want to destroy the sword sect." Yilan fell silent for a moment before he replied, "We can work together." Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Yilan added, "However, you'd better not play any tricks." Yi Xian replied, "Don't worry, as long as you don't play any tricks, I, Yi Xian, will never play any tricks." Yilan looked at Yi Xian, "You said we should work together. How do we work together?" Yi Xian looked at Shenwu City, "Now we'll attack first and catch the sword sect off guard." Yilan calmly replied, "Isn't it better to let them kill each other now?" Yi Xian said with a smile, "Your Excellency, have you seen the experts in the Dao realm fighting?" Yilan frowned. Yi Xian continued, "Inside Shenwu City, it's only the juniors from the sword sect and Wuyuan who are fighting amongst themselves. Their Dao state cultivators have yet to make a move. Don't you think that's strange?" Yilan looked at Yi Xian, "Just tell me." Yi Xian replied in a low voice, "Think about it, the sword sect has already obtained that treasure. Why would they still want to declare war on Wuyuan?" Yilan narrowed his eyes, "Are you saying that they have other motives?" "Of course." Yi Xian walked towards Yilan and spoke in a serious tone, "If my guess is correct, they're putting on a show for you." Yilan stared fixedly in the direction of Divine Martial City. Moments later, his pupils shrank. "They might be trying to move that treasure or subdue it." Yi Xian quickly said, "Yes. That supreme treasure was a divine item. Even Li Xianfeng wouldn't be able to subdue it in a short period of time. What they lacked now was time. Once Li Xianfeng subdued that treasure, at that time the sword sect's family treasure. I don't even dare to think about it." Hearing this, Yilan's expression instantly turned gloomy. As if remembering something, he turned towards Yi Xian, "You didn't subdue that treasure?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Do you think I can subdue that treasure with my strength?" As he spoke, he turned to look in the direction of the sword sect. "We don't have much time left. Once Li Xianfeng subdues that treasure, he'll be invincible and all of us will die." Yilan looked in the direction of Divine Martial City hesitantly. He did not really trust Yi Xian. He was still on guard against Yi Xian. Just then Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Do you know how I was able to kill a Dao realm cultivator in an instant?" Yilan looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled, "It's because of that treasure. Furthermore, I've borrowed the power of that treasure, so I have the power to kill a Dao realm cultivator in an instant. Once Li Xianfeng obtains that treasure, not to mention all of you, even the Star Lord's true body will be instantly killed by him." Yilan fell silent. At this moment, a Dao realm cultivator next to him sent a voice transmission. "This man may be selfish, but his words can be trusted. No matter what, we can't let Li Xianfeng subdue that treasure." Yilan nodded and looked at Yi Xian, "What about you if we make a move?" Yi Xian replied in a low voice, "I'll assassinate him in secret." "Assassinate?" Yilan's eyelids twitched. He was well aware of Yi Xian's abilities, especially Yi Xian's flying sword. In a head-on battle, the flying sword was not particularly scary, but if Yi Xian were to hide in the dark and attack from time to time, it was enough to make one's scalp go numb. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, "Let's not waste any more time. Shall we act?" Yilan nodded. "You'll look for an opportunity to kill the sword sect's Dao realm cultivators in one strike. Especially that Li Xianfeng, if possible, kill him first." Yi Xian nodded. "Everyone, I'll be waiting for all of you in the city." Having said that, he disappeared silently. After Yi Xian left, the Dao realm cultivator next to Yilan said in a low voice, "We need to be careful of this person." Yilan nodded. "If he really only wants revenge and doesn't want that treasure, then there's no need for us to be enemies with him. If he has other thoughts," at this point a cold killing intent flashed in his eyes, "I hope he's smarter and doesn't do anything stupid. Let's go." With that, the few of them disappeared silently. Shenwu City Sword Sect. In the main hall, Li Xianfeng sat quietly with a sword in front of him. At this moment, a man in black suddenly appeared in the hall. Li Xianfeng opened his eyes. "Did you find him?" The man in black shook his head. "Sect Master, that Yi Xian seems to have disappeared from the world. Trash." Li Xianfeng suddenly said angrily, "My sword sect can't even find a single person." The man in black lowered his head, not daring to speak. Li Xianfeng stood up and walked to the door. half of his face was extremely ferocious. Yi Xian. Right now he wasn't thinking about that treasure, he was thinking about how to kill Yi Xian. Destroying half of his body had a huge impact on him. If he couldn't recover his body, he would never be able to advance in this lifetime. At this time, Li Xianfeng said, "Continue to search, we must find him." The man in black nodded and quickly retreated. At this time, several powerful forces suddenly appeared in the sky above the sword sect. Seeing this, Li Xuanfeng's face changed greatly. He soared into the sky, and the moment he flew out, several powerful forces directly blasted down from the sky. In an instant, boom boom boom. The entire sword sect began to shake violently, countless dust and smoke rose into the sky, and some of the main halls of the sword sect were instantly turned into dust. Enemy attack. A voice suddenly rang out from within the sword sect, and soon several sword rays soared into the sky. In the sky, Li Xianfeng appeared in front of Yi Lan, and when he saw it was Yi Lan, he snarled, "Yi Lan, are you crazy?" Yi Lan said indifferently, "Li Xianfeng, we meet again." Li Xianfeng stared at Yi Lan. "That treasure is not in my hands." Yi Lan said angrily, "Li Xianfeng, are you trying to grind the old man's IQ to the ground?" Li Xianfeng wanted to say something, but Yi Lan suddenly disappeared. Li Xuanfeng's expression changed and he quickly said, "Meet the enemy." As soon as Li Xuanfeng's voice fell, 6 Dao realm swordsmen suddenly appeared, but Yi Lan and the others were not afraid at all, because they had a total of 10 Dao realm experts on their side. 10. This time they were naturally well prepared. Soon the battle began. In the clouds above the sword sect, 2 old men were facing off. The old man on the right wore a linen robe, and held a sheathed long sword in his hand. This man was the previous sect leader of the sword sect, Mu Fengqian. Opposite Mu Fengqian was an old man holding a spear. The old man was thin, with a head of white hair and a face full of wrinkles, but his eyes were as sharp as a knife. Mu Fengqian was expressionless. "Who gave you the guts to offend my sword sect?" The old man stroked his beard and smiled. "Don't scare the old man, since the old man dared to come. Why would I be afraid of your sword sect?" Mu Fengqian looked at the old man but did not speak. Instead, he slowly walked towards the old man, and with every step he took, a powerful sword aura condensed in front of him. From afar the old man laughed. "Come, let the old man have a taste of the legendary sword saint." As soon as he finished speaking, he stomped his right foot. A glint of light flashed in the air. As soon as the glint of light appeared, the sky above the sword sect suddenly darkened. At that moment the space above the sword sect had collapsed. In the instant that the spear-wielding elder attacked, Mu Fengqian suddenly unsheathed his sword. Buzz! The cry of a sword suddenly shook the sky. Rumble! Soon, a series of earth-shattering explosions came from the sky above the sword sect. The sword sect was also in the midst of a great battle. Li Xianfeng was fighting Yi Lan. Even though half of Li Xuanfeng's body had been destroyed, he was still very powerful. The Dao realm cultivators of the sword sect were also blocking Yi Lan and the others. Rumble! At this moment an explosion sounded in the sky, causing Yi Lan and Li Xianfeng to retreat. After Li Xianfeng stopped, he glared angrily at Yi Lan. "Yi Lan, the treasure is not with me." Yi Lan sneered, "If it's not with you, is it with Yi Xian?" Li Xianfeng replied, "It's with him." Yi Lan's expression turned ferocious. "Do you really think that the old man is an idiot?" Li Xianfeng wanted to say something, but Yi Lan suddenly disappeared. Li Xuanfeng's expression changed and he hurriedly stabbed with his sword. The sword flashed and the space cracked. Boom! The two collided once again and separated. Li Xianfeng had just stopped and was about to speak when his pupils suddenly shrank. He turned around and slashed with his sword. Bang! A figure was instantly sent flying. There was a sword in between Li Xuanfeng's brows. However, the sword did not stab into Li Xuanfeng's body because it was blocked by a small golden shield the size of a palm. Not far away, Yi Xian's expression was dark. He did not expect Li Xianfeng to have such a defensive treasure. That small golden shield was at least at the manifestation state. When he saw Yi Xian, Li Xuanfeng's expression instantly turned ferocious. "Yi Xian, it's you." At this moment Yi Xian suddenly pointed at Li Xianfeng angrily. "Old dog Li, give me back my treasure." Li Xianfeng was enraged. He was about to speak when Yi Lan suddenly charged at him from behind. Li Xianfeng did not dare to be careless. He hurriedly turned around and stabbed with his sword. With this stab, countless sword rays shot out like raindrops. By this time Yi Xian had already disappeared. Boom boom boom. Almost 20 Dao realm experts were fighting in the sword sect. How terrifying was the power of 20 people. At this moment, the space in the sky above the sword sect was trembling violently, and it was ceaselessly cracking apart. On the other hand, countless mountains in the surroundings of the sword sect had collapsed layer by layer. At this moment, the sword sect could be said to be in a mess. In the air, after Li Xianfeng forced Yilan back, he roared, "Yilan, you stupid dog! The treasure is not in my hands. You've been tricked by Yi Xian." Not far away, Yilan clenched his right hand. His eyes were cold. "Li Xianfeng, can you change your trick to a better one?" As he spoke, he looked around. "Yi Xian, go kill the others. The old man will block him for you." "Thank you." In the dark, Yi Xian's voice rang out. "Li Xianfeng. P.S. I welcome everyone's criticism. I've read the reviews. If you think my writing is not good, you can complain. Only with criticism can I improve. Of course, I hope to hear praise. Nothing would make me happier than receiving your approval. You all hope that I can write better and more. I also hope that I can write better because I'm still poor. I can't be arrogant. Only when I write well will the readers be satisfied. That's why I've always wanted to be popular. Once I'm popular, I won't have to worry about these things anymore. Unfortunately, after a few years, I'm still half dead. Sweat. I'm ashamed. Finally, to be honest, having readers to spur us on is a good thing for us writers. However, I also hope that when you complain, don't bring your family into it. Finally, thank you for your support. Whether you read the pirated version or the original version, thank you for your support. Of course, I hope that you all read the original version. Time to write. Chapter 536. Yi Xian no longer targeted Li Xianfeng because Li Xianfeng had that manifestation realm defensive treasure. If he wanted to kill Li Xianfeng, it would waste too much energy. Yilan also noticed this, which was why he gave up on Li Xianfeng. A few breaths after Yi Xian disappeared, Li Xianfeng suddenly turned to the right. There, a sword ray suddenly pierced the head of a Dao realm expert from the sword sect. Seeing this, Li Xuanfeng's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Soul run. However, the Dao realm swordsman couldn't move at all. He just stared into the distance, his eyes filled with disbelief. Soul fixation sword. Yi Xian's sword was a soul fixation sword. Therefore, the swordsman's soul was already fixed in his body. He couldn't escape at all. Li Xianfeng wanted to say something, but at this moment, a sword ray suddenly flashed behind the swordsman. In the next moment, the Dao realm swordsman's head was sent flying. Blood spurted out like a fountain. No! Li Xuanfeng's face instantly turned ferocious. A Dao realm swordsman. To nurture a Dao realm swordsman, not only did it require a huge amount of resources, it also required time. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 500 years for a Dao realm swordsman to be born. Therefore, sacrificing a Dao realm swordsman was an inestimable loss for the sword sect. Not far away, Yilan's expression was also somewhat solemn. If he had to fight Yi Xian head-on, he wasn't afraid. Even if Yi Xian used those trump cards, he wasn't afraid. As long as he didn't underestimate Yi Xian and went all out, it was almost impossible for Yi Xian to kill him. However, if Yi Xian were to launch a sneak attack like this, then it would not be a normal kind of horror. At this moment he rejoiced slightly, rejoiced that he had cooperated with Yi Xian. Otherwise, if Yi Xian were to play tricks while they were fighting against the sword sect, and if he didn't have a defensive treasure at the creation stage, then even he wouldn't have the confidence to block Yi Xian's sword. Fear. Be on guard. At this moment, not only did Yi Lan's heart fill with fear, he also became more cautious. They were wary of Yi Xian. In front of Yi Lan, Li Xianfeng returned to his senses and roared angrily, "Everyone stick together." Hearing Li Xuanfeng's words, the remaining sword sect's Dao realm experts started to gather together. At this moment, they'd noticed that the Dao realm swordsman had been killed, and they were slightly panicked. Was Yi Xian a swordsman or a killer? Li Xianfeng turned to look at Yi Lan with an incomparably ferocious expression. He no longer had his usual composure. "Old dog Yi, I've told you that treasure isn't in my hands. If you don't leave now, don't blame me for being impolite." Yi Lan sneered, "If it's not in your hands, do you think it's in mine? Li Xianfeng, the old man doesn't want to waste time with you. Hand over the treasure and we'll leave immediately. We won't interfere in your grudge with Yi Xian. But if you don't hand it over, today will be the end of the sword sect." Li Xuanfeng's expression turned ferocious. "You?" As he spoke, he turned to look down. Sword formation. As soon as he spoke, the ground of the sword sect suddenly split open, and a huge sword shot into the sky. As soon as the huge sword shot into the sky, a shapeless sword aura enveloped Yi Lan and the others. Besides that, 10 swords suddenly appeared in the sky above the sword sect. The 10 swords circled around, and rays of sword light enveloped the entire sword sect. Seeing this, Yi Lan's expression instantly turned solemn. At this moment, Li Xianfeng suddenly appeared in the center of the sword formation. In the next moment he clasped his hands together. Annihilation of myriad swords. The swords in the sky suddenly transformed into rays of sword light that shot towards Yi Lan and the others. Yi Lan's expression changed drastically. Join forces. As soon as he spoke, 10 Dao realm experts shot into the sky. Rumble. Rumble. Soon, the sky above the sword sect started to tremble violently, and countless rays of sword light shot out. In the dark, Yi Xian didn't make another move. After the Dao realm experts gathered together, he didn't have a chance to attack. However, he didn't give up, and he was looking for an opportunity in the dark. Suddenly, Li Xianfeng looked at the Dao realm swordsman from the sword sect. The Dao realm experts nodded, and then numerous rays of sword light shot towards Yi Lan and the others. As soon as the sword sect's Dao realm experts joined in, Yi Lan and the others were instantly suppressed. Moreover, Yi Lan, who led the group, had over a dozen sword marks on his body. A cold smile appeared on Li Xuanfeng's face. He was about to activate the sword formation again when a Dao realm swordsman nearby suddenly roared. No. As soon as he finished speaking, his head flew into the sky. Yi Xian. Li Xianfeng roared furiously, and his face distorted. The remaining Dao realm experts' expressions changed drastically, and they didn't dare to attack again. All of them moved closer to each other. Yi Xian, who was hiding in the dark, was too great of a threat to them. As for Yi Lan and the others, they heaved a sigh of relief. If the Dao realm swordsmen didn't retreat, then they would be in a terrible situation. Suddenly, an old man with a spear appeared in front of Yi Lan and the others, and Mu Fengchen appeared in front of Li Xianfeng as well. The old man glanced at Mu Fengchen. Let's go. Yi Lan was slightly hesitant. You allow? The old man looked at Yi Lan. Let's go. With that he turned and left. Yi Lan and the others didn't dare to stay any longer, and they turned and left. The reason they dared to attack the sword sect was precisely because of Elder Yu's existence. Because the sword sect had a sword saint, and if there was no one to keep the sword saint busy, then all of them who were Dao realm experts would be giving their lives away. Seeing that Yi Lan and the others were about to leave, Li Xianfeng roared angrily, "Want to leave? After them." Behind him, the sword sect's Dao realm experts were about to give chase, but at this time Mu Fengchen suddenly said, "Stand down." Hearing Mu Fengchen's words, the sword sect's Dao realm experts all stopped. Li Xianfeng looked at Mu Fengchen, puzzled. "Master." Mu Fengchen looked at Li Xianfeng and shook his head. "You disappoint me." Li Xuanfeng's face changed. "Master, what do you mean?" Mu Fengchen said softly, "As a sect master, you let your emotions affect your decisions. Let me ask you, declaring war on Wuyuan, what did our sword sect get?" Li Xianfeng said in a low voice, "That Yi Ling is in Wuyuan." Mu Fengchen said, "Yi Xian is our sword sect's enemy and you went to look for his sister? What will the world think of our sword sect? They will think that our sword sect is useless." As he spoke, he stared at Li Xianfeng. "Do you think that you're useless?" Hearing this, Li Xuanfeng's face turned ugly. Mu Fengchen shook his head. "Our sword sect wants to walk out of this place to shake the world. However, our sword sect's reputation is equally important. A swordsman who doesn't think about using his sword to defeat his opponent, instead, he wants to capture his sister to force his hand. Is that still a swordsman? No, such a person is not fit to be a swordsman. Furthermore, it's not just useless, it's shameless." Li Xuanfeng's face turned even uglier. Mu Fengchen continued, "The current you has been overwhelmed by rage. You're not fit to be the leader of the sword sect. Sect master, from now on, I will be the temporary sect master of the sword sect." Li Xuanfeng's face was pale as a sheet. "Master?" Mu Fengchen said, "Go back and reflect on yourself." After a moment of silence, Li Xianfeng turned and left. Mu Fengchen looked around and shook his head. They did not expect Yi Lan's group to attack the sword sect so suddenly. For so many years, the sword sect had been at peace for too long. No force had ever openly attacked the sword sect. It was precisely because of this that the sword sect had suffered a huge loss. They lost 2 Dao swordsmen. This was a huge blow to the sword sect. Mu Fengchen suddenly said, "Pass down my order, all swordsman disciples in the city are to return to the sect and stop fighting with Wuyuan." Behind Mu Fengchen, a Dao swordsman quietly retreated. Mu Fengchen said again, "Be careful of Yi Xian." A Dao swordsman said solemnly, "Old sect leader Mu, if Yi Xian is still in the dark, Mu Fengchen said softly, "I will find a way to force him to show himself." All of you stay in the sword sect. With me around he won't dare to show himself. Having said that, he quietly disappeared. In the field, the swordsmen exchanged looks with a trace of helplessness in their eyes. They did not expect things to develop to this extent. The loss was too great. In a certain cave, Li Xianfeng sat on the ground with a sword floating in front of him. Behind the sword was a statue. The statue of the sword sect's ancestral founder. At this moment, Mu Fengchen appeared in front of Li Xianfeng. Mu Fengchen said indifferently, "Now, our sword sect has enemies on all sides. Not only that, but we also have not obtained that treasure. The world thinks that the treasure is in our sword sect, so those flies will crazily come to our sword sect." Li Xianfeng opened his eyes. "I've miscalculated." Mu Fengchen continued, "Initially my sword sect was in an advantageous position. But because of your greed, my sword sect is in an absolute disadvantage." Li Xianfeng shook his head. "I never expected that the treasure would flee by itself." Mu Fengchen looked at Li Xianfeng and continued, "You did not hand it over to me the moment you obtained it, but tried to subdue it. However, you've underestimated it." Li Xianfeng fell into silence. Mu Qin said in a soft voice, "Greed is the original sin. This time just treat it as a lesson." Li Xianfeng looked at Mu Fengchen and asked, "What about Yi Xian?" Mu Fengchen replied, "I will naturally think of a way to deal with him. Right now you just have to meditate here. Come out when you've figured it out." When he finished, he turned around and disappeared. Li Xianfeng fell into silence for a long time before he looked at the statue before him. The statue was of a young man with a sword hanging by his waist. A brief moment later, Li Xianfeng walked up to the statue and looked at it with a cold gaze. "Back then you set the rule that the sword sect cannot leave the divine martial city. Do you know that my sword sect had many chances to dominate the world? But it was your bullshit rule that forced our sword sect to hide in the divine martial city." As he spoke, his expression turned sinister. "The strong rule is respected in this world, but you set this bullshit rule. You're the greatest sinner of my sword sect." When he finished speaking, he slashed down with his sword. Sizzle. The statue before him was split into two and fell to the ground. Chapter 537. Outside Xinwu City in front of a pond. The spear-wielding elder Yuelao stood silently with his spear in hand. The spear in his hand was very ordinary, it was just a simple metal spear. Not far from Yuelao was Yilan. At this moment, Yilan still had many sword wounds on his body. Yilan said in a low voice, "We've underestimated the sword sect." As far as he was concerned, it shouldn't be a problem for them to take down the sword sect with Elder Yuelao's help when they launched a large-scale attack on the sword sect. However, he didn't expect that not only did they fail to take down the sword sect, they were almost forced to stay in the sword sect. If it wasn't for Yi Xian, at least half of them would have stayed in the sword sect. Yi Xian. Thinking of this, Yilan looked around. Yi Xian, are you still here?" At this moment, Yi Xian appeared not too far away on the right. At this moment, Yi Xian's face was rather pale. Yi Xian glanced at the spear-wielding elder Yuelao, and secretly raised his guard. This old man was definitely not someone he could fight against right now. Yuelao also looked at Yi Xian. After sizing up Yi Xian, he said softly, "You're that Yi Xian?" Yi Xian nodded. Yuelao nodded slightly, "You're not bad." As he spoke, he sized up Yi Xian again. "The old man is curious about something, I wonder if you could dispel it for the old man." Yi Xian said, "Senior, please speak." Yuelao said, "Although the items on the interstellar bounty board are not simple, according to what the old man knows, the treasure on you completely crushes the other items on the interstellar bounty board. Why would such a treasure be on you?" Yi Xian said in a low voice, "I don't know." Yuelao frowned slightly. Yi Xian said again, "Since I was born, this item has been on me." Yuelao asked, "Your parents left it behind?" Yi Xian nodded, "It was left behind by my mother, but it was given to him by my father, but my father. I don't know who he is." Yuelao fell into deep thought for a moment before he looked at Yilan. The latter replied in a low voice, "We haven't been able to find out his father's background. We don't have any information at all." Elder Yuelao looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian said softly, "Senior, it doesn't matter how this pagoda came into my possession. It's no longer important. The pressing matter at hand is to seize this pagoda from the sword sect." Yuelao smiled and said, "That item is yours." Yi Xian shook his head. "Senior, please don't test me. This item has brought me endless disasters. If I continue to overestimate myself and possess this item, it would be equivalent to courting death." At this point he smiled bitterly. Although I'm a little reluctant, there's nothing I can do. Compared to treasures, life is more important, isn't it? Yuelao smiled and said, young man, to be able to have such awareness, very good. Yi Xian said in a low voice, to tell you the truth, I only want revenge now. Not only did the sword sect slander me, they even wanted to make a move against my younger sister and friends. This is something that I can't tolerate. Yuelao thought for a moment and then he said, that Mu Fengchen told me that the treasure isn't in the sword sect's possession. Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior, do you believe that? Yuelao looked at Yi Xian and smiled, do you? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. If I'm not wrong, then they'll definitely say that the treasure is still with me, Yi Xian. Is that right? Yuelao nodded. Yes. Yi Xian walked over to stand before Yuelao. Senior's strength has probably surpassed the Dao realm. I'm standing before you right now so you can search me. If that item is really with me, then I'm willing to die. Yuelao looked at Yi Xian, and in the next moment his divine sense suddenly enveloped Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian was practically transparent before Yuelao. On the other hand, all the items within Yi Xian's spatial ring appeared in Yuelao's mind without any reservation. After a short moment, Yuelao withdrew his divine sense, and he looked at Yi Xian with a deep frown on his face. Meanwhile, Yilan said in a low voice, Yuelao, this sword sect is filled with crafty and cunning people. Their words can't be trusted at all. Yuelao looked at Yilan and Yilan said, earlier when Yi Xian handed over the treasure, that Li Xianfeng actually shamelessly said that the treasure belonged to his sword sect and that Yi Xian stole it. None of these swordsmen can be trusted. Yuelao was silent. Yilan continued, Yuelao, think about it. After the treasure was taken away by the sword sect, how is Yi Xian going to steal it from the hands of so many experts from the sword sect? Are Li Xianfeng and that sword saint stupid? At this point his expression turned cold. If I'm not wrong, this is their stalling tactic. They hope that we'll place our focus on Yi Xian, and then they'll be able to subdue the treasure. Yuelao nodded slightly. I'm going back for a while. You guys stay here and wait for my news. Before I return, don't make a move. After saying that, he glanced at Yi Xian, then turned around and disappeared into the horizon. After Yuelao left, Yi Xian said in a low voice, everyone, this sword sect's strength. Yilan sneered, don't worry, even though the sword sect is strong, we're not weak either. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. Li Xianfeng and the sword sect will definitely search for you. You must be careful. Right now he has already treated Yi Xian as an ally. Yi Xian nodded, I understand. At this point he hesitated for a moment before saying, I want to have a breakthrough. I wonder if you guys can protect me? Breakthrough? Yilan asked, a breakthrough to the Dharma breakthroughs? Yi Xian nodded. Yilan thought for a moment before replying, sure. If Yi Xian was strong, it would be beneficial to them as well. Yi Xian nodded and said, this place isn't safe. Let's go somewhere else. After saying that, he turned around and left. Yilan and the others followed behind him. At this moment, a Dao realm expert next to Yilan spoke to him through profound qi. Even though the sword sect can't be trusted, we can't completely trust this person either. Yilan replied calmly, of course I know that. However, it won't do us any harm if he becomes stronger now. Besides, with Yuelao around in the future, he won't be able to stir up any waves. The Dao realm expert thought for a moment before nodding. Indeed, it wouldn't do them any harm if Yi Xian became stronger now. This was because they now had a common enemy, the sword sect. With Yi Xian's help, it would be much easier for them to deal with the Dao realm experts of the sword sect. Soon Yi Xian and the others entered a mountain range. In the mountain range, Yi Xian found a quiet place while Yilan and the others hid in the surroundings. Yi Xian was sitting cross-legged on the ground when a voice suddenly rang out from the 6th floor, do you trust them? Yi Xian shook his head. Naturally, he wouldn't completely trust Yilan and the others, but he had no other choice. If he didn't improve now, he wouldn't have the time to do so in the future, and he had no choice but to improve. Because his current level of strength was still not enough. He had to give it his all. Once he entered the Dharma realm, his strength would definitely increase greatly. When that time came, sneak attacks on Dao realm experts would be a piece of cake and he would be able to protect himself. Of course, he didn't completely trust Yilan and the others. He had already called the Emperor Hound back into the World Prison Pagoda. Apart from that, Xiaoling was also on standby with the sword at the top of the pagoda. This was the Emperor Hound's suggestion. Because Xiaoling's combat strength was actually very terrifying, Yi Xian collected his thoughts and calmed himself down. A moment later, Yi Xian took out an immortal weapon-grade sword and stabbed it into his abdomen. Boom! A powerful force spread out from Yi Xian's body. Soon Yi Xian began to absorb this force in a frenzy. In the dark, Yilan looked down at Yi Xian quietly. No one knew what he was thinking. Next to Yilan, a Dao realm expert suddenly spoke to him through Xian Qi. If we attack now, Yilan said calmly, do you really think he trusts us that much? If I'm not mistaken, he must have something to rely on since he dared to increase his strength in front of us. If we attack and fight to the death with him, the sword sect will be the happiest. As he spoke, he withdrew his gaze and turned to look at the sword sect. Right now, the sword sect is our biggest enemy. The Dao realm expert nodded. Their goal in coming here was to obtain that precious treasure. Just like that, Yi Xian began to absorb the force in a frenzy and the aura around him grew stronger. Fortunately, Yi Lan and the others had used a forbidden technique around him, so Yi Xian's aura did not leak out. To avoid unnecessary trouble, Yi Lan and the others also went into hiding. Wuyuan. Helian Tian sat in the main hall. Inside the hall there were 6 Wuyuan experts, 6 Dao realm experts. Besides them, Anlanxiu Emosia, Lian Wanli and Xiaochen were also here. Helian Tendo said, I'm sure you've heard about what happened to the sword sect. A middle-aged man walked out from below. Now that the sword sect has suffered a great loss, I think we should hit them when they're down. Hit them when they're down. Everyone looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man said calmly, the sword sect is heartless. Why should we talk about morality with them? An old man nodded. Indeed. The sword sect has declared war on Wuyuan, which shows their wild ambition. At a time like this, we Wuyuan can't talk about morality with them. Helian Tian looked at Emosia and the others. What do you think? Lian Wanli's lips curled up. Fight. And Lanxiu nodded. Fight. Emosia said, Seniors, the sword sect's intentions are clear. If we talk about morality with them now, it's undoubtedly stupid. So, I think we should fight. Not only do we have to fight, we have to beat them to death. Xiaochen said as well, Brother Emosia is right. The sword sect has wild ambitions. If we give them the chance, they'll definitely attack us. So, instead of waiting for them to make a move, why don't we take the initiative now? As soon as he finished speaking, he looked at Helian Tian. Everyone looked at Helian Tian as well. However, Helian Tian shook his head. All of you underestimate the sword sect. Qin Shan said solemnly, Sect leader, you mean that the sword sect has a trump card that no one knows about? Helian Tian nodded. The sword sect's founding ancestor didn't just leave a clone in the sword sect all those years ago, he even left behind a destructive sword formation. Besides that, the sword sect's founding ancestor would enter the sword sect's forbidden area, the sword tomb, when he or she falls. If we attack, then the best outcome would be for both sides to suffer heavy losses, and then others can reap the benefits. Qin Shan said solemnly, Are we going to give up just like that? Helian Tian stood up, walked to the entrance of the hall and spoke softly, Wait. Wait for an opportunity, a chance to kill them with a single strike. Meanwhile, Qin Shan suddenly asked, How strong is the clone of the sword sect's founding ancestor? Helian Tian shook his head. I don't know. The strength of the sword sect's founding ancestor and Wuyuan's founding ancestor was a mystery. Because no matter if it was the sword sect or Wuyuan, there was very little information about them. P.S. Seeking monthly votes. Chapter 538. In the dense forest. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, still absorbing energy at a crazy rate. Devouring sword. Right now, he was cultivating the cultivation technique that the plain-dressed woman had left behind for him, and he had gradually discovered something special about this cultivation technique. He didn't understand it before, so he just needed to practice it. But now, he realized that this cultivation method had transformed his body into a dantian. His entire body was now a dantian. Apart from that, his current physique had another special feature, which was that he could devour swords. Of course, the swords couldn't be of a lower grade than the soul-suppressing sword, and the opponent's strength couldn't be too much stronger than his. Right now, he didn't dare to face the Dao realm swordsman's sword head-on. If he didn't absorb it, he'd die. After all, his current realm was too low. However, even though he didn't dare to face the Dao realm swordsman's sword head-on, once his realm increased, he wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. Time passed bit by bit, and Yi Xian had devoured 10 immortal weapon swords. At this moment, his aura was at least several times stronger than before. In the dark, Yilan furrowed his brows. Because Yi Xian's aura was getting stronger and stronger, if this went on, he'd be exposed. After a moment of silence, Yilan said solemnly, Everyone seal this place together, don't let his aura leak out. Behind him, the Dao realm powerhouses nodded. Soon they began to seal the space around Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly took out a fortune-grade sword and stabbed it into his abdomen. Boom. A powerful burst of energy instantly erupted from Yi Xian's body, and Yi Xian's body began to absorb the energy madly. At this moment, his aura skyrocketed like a volcanic eruption. In the dark, Yilan furrowed his brows again. Isn't it just breaking through to the Dharma realm? With such a big commotion, those who didn't know better would think that you're breaking through to the Tao realm. As he spoke, he reinforced the space around him again, not letting Yi Xian's aura leak out. With the joint efforts of several Tao realm experts to seal the space, although Yi Xian's aura was extremely strong from the outside, there was not a single ripple in this place. After another hour, Yi Xian took out another sword of fortune and stabbed it into his abdomen. Then he began to devour it frantically. At this moment, his body was like a vortex, crazily devouring the energy. After devouring, his aura grew stronger and stronger. In the dark, Yi Lan and the rest looked at each other with shock in their eyes. Because the aura on Yi Xian's body had already far surpassed the aura of a 10,000 Laws realm powerhouse. An old man next to Yi Lan spoke in a deep voice, "This person is not normal." Yi Lan gently nodded. This Yi Xian had really shocked him. Be it in terms of strength or the increase in his cultivation level, he was clearly just trying to break through to the infinite Dharma realm. However, Yi Xian's aura was now close to the Saint realm. At this moment, the old man next to Yi Lan spoke in a low voice, "If we were to become enemies then?" Yi Lan shook his head. "Right now we have no conflict of interest with him. If he becomes stronger it will be beneficial for us as well." The old man hesitated for a moment but did not say anything. However, there was a trace of worry in his eyes. Yi Xian. If the current Yi Xian were to fight a Tao state cultivator head-on, Yi Xian would have a high chance of winning. Especially after he had used all his trump cards. If he did not fight head-on, a Tao state cultivator would not be a match for him. If Yi Xian were to increase his cultivation level once again, Yi Xian's power would undoubtedly increase. Fear. It would be a lie to say that they were not afraid. Fortunately, as Yi Lan had said, Yi Xian was now on their side. If Yi Xian became stronger it would be beneficial for them as well. The old man felt relieved at the thought of this and stopped thinking about it. Just like that, the night passed. Just as the sky was about to brighten, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from Yi Xian's body. This aura was like a tsunami. As soon as it appeared, the surrounding space began to tremble violently. Yi Lan hurriedly said, "Suppress." As soon as Yi Lan had spoken, the surrounding Tao state cultivators joined forces to suppress the aura. Soon the trembling space gradually calmed down. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. Yi Lan appeared in front of Yi Xian, the Dharma realm? Yi Xian nodded and rose to his feet. A powerful aura once again rippled out from his body. However, it soon returned to his body. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes and clenched his fists. Power. At this moment his entire body was filled with power. It was different. It was completely different. Even though it was only a difference of one realm, his soul and every other aspect had been greatly improved, especially his mental strength and soul power. If he were to launch a sneak attack on a Tao state cultivator now, it would be extremely easy. Just then Yi Lan's expression suddenly changed. He turned to look at the sky. "Someone's coming." Just as he spoke, an old man appeared in front of the crowd. The person who had arrived was the previous sect master of the sword sect, Mu Fengchen. At this moment Yi Xian had already disappeared. Mu Fengchen glared coldly at Yi Lan and the others. "Where's Yi Xian?" Yi Lan replied icily, "How would we know where he is?" Mu Fengchen narrowed his eyes. "Die." As soon as he spoke, he drew his sword and slashed. A dazzling ray of light from the sword slashed down from the sky. Yi Lan's expression changed greatly and he threw a punch forward. Boom. As soon as the punch was thrown, Yi Lan's entire body was sent flying 100 feet back. By the time he stopped, his entire right arm was bleeding profusely. Yi Lan was about to attack again when an old man suddenly appeared in front of Mu Fengchen. This person was Yuelao. Yuelao looked at Mu Fengchen and smiled. "Sect Master Mu, if your hands are itchy, how about I exchange a few blows with you?" Mu Fengchen looked at Yuelao expressionlessly. "Where's Yi Xian?" Yuelao smiled. "Where's Yi Xian? You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" Mu Fengchen glared at Yuelao. "Sect Master Mu, to be honest, we are determined to obtain that treasure. Forget about your sword sect. Even if your sword sect and Wuyuan join forces, we will not give it up. Hand it over and we will leave Shenwu Star Field immediately. Otherwise, your sword sect will never have peace." Hand it over and we'll leave Divine Martial Star region immediately. Otherwise, your sword sect will never have peace. Mu Fengchen narrowed his eyes. Are you threatening me? Yuelao nodded, yes. The sword in Mu Fengchen's hand began to tremble. Yuelao remained fearless, a faint smile still hanging on his face. Moments later, Mu Fengchen said, I've told you before, that treasure is not with my sword sect. Is that so? Not far away, Yilan suddenly sneered. That day when Li Shenfeng snatched that treasure, we weren't blind. Mu Fengchen said indifferently, that supreme treasure did indeed fall into his hands, but that supreme treasure suddenly disappeared later on. If I'm not mistaken, that treasure should still be with Yi Xian. Yilan was cold. He smiled. Do you think we're 3 years old? How could you come up with such a lowly lie? Mu Fengchen looked at Yilan. If you don't believe me, you can ask Yi Xian to come out and search him. Then you'll know if I'm telling the truth. Yilan sneered without saying a word. Yuelao also shook his head and smiled. Mu Fengchen, you just want Yi Xian to come out, right? Mu Fengchen stared straight at Yuelao. If you search him, you'll know that Yuelao suddenly interrupted Mu Fengchen. It's just as Yilan said, your sword sect is really full of people who like to play tricks. Mu Fengchen narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Yuelao said calmly, I've already searched him. However, that treasure wasn't there. Hearing this, Mu Fengchen furrowed his brows. Moments later, he sneered, well done Yi Xian, you're really good. As he said this, he looked at Yuelao. Since you don't believe me, then show me what you've got. My sword sect will take it. With that, he turned and disappeared into the horizon. After Mu Fengchen left, Yi Xian walked out. Yuelao looked at Yi Xian. 10,000 Laws Realm? Yi Xian nodded, I've just broken through. Yuelao nodded slightly, I'm afraid that the sword sect hates you to death now. You better not be too high profile. Otherwise, if you're caught by that Mu Fengchen, you won't have any chance of survival. Mu Fengchen. Yi Xian nodded. Although he had already broken through, he was very clear that if he were to go up against experts like Mu Fengchen and Yuelao, he still had no chance of winning. Yuelao looked in the direction of the sword sect and said softly, now it seems that the sword sect really wants to swallow that treasure without a care. Yilan said coldly, I'm just afraid that their appetite will be small and they won't be able to swallow it. Yuelao shook his head. This sword sect is not ordinary. We cannot underestimate them. Yi Xian looked at Yuelao. What other trump cards does this sword sect have? Yuelao nodded. They naturally have trump cards to be able to pass down their legacy for so many years. Rumor has it that back then, the founder of the sword sect left behind a clone in the sword sect. This clone. How strong is it? Yi Xian asked. Yuelao shook his head. I don't know its strength, but it's definitely not weak. Those kind of people are all peerless geniuses. Even if it's a clone, it should be extremely strong. Other than that, within the sword sect, there is also a sword formation that he left behind. Rumor has it that this sword formation has extremely strong killing power. Even experts above the Dao realm can be easily killed by it. Even if it's exaggerated, it's definitely not weak. Saying that, he paused slightly and continued, other than the clone of the sword sect founder and the sword formation, the sword sect has passed down and developed for so many years. They definitely have some other trump cards. Otherwise, they wouldn't have existed for so many years. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, then what about us? Yuelao glanced at Yi Xian and smiled, if we don't have the strength, how would we dare to covet that treasure? Yi Xian nodded, Senior, when do we launch an attack on the sword sect? Yuelao said softly, there's no rush for now. Yi Xian said, they have already obtained that treasure. If we let them subdue that treasure, the situation will be extremely disadvantageous to us. Yuelao was silent for a moment and said, wait? Yi Xian asked, wait for what? Yuelao said softly, wait for reinforcements, wait for helpers. Saying that, he turned his head and looked towards the end of the horizon. They should be arriving soon. P.S. Sorry for the late update. Don't find excuses. Just say something. Don't eat rice dumplings randomly. I'm going to collapse soon. There were still 2 more chapters to go. Chapter 539. Reinforcements. Yi Xian knew that this Yuelao and the others must have called for reinforcements. However, it was normal. With their current lineup, they definitely couldn't wipe out the sword sect. Collecting his thoughts, Yi Xian said, Seniors, I have some matters to attend to. If there's anything, I will contact you. Yuelao looked at Yi Xian. Be careful, don't let Mu Fengchen find you. Saying this, he hesitated for a moment, then flicked his finger and a talisman appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was puzzled. This is? Yuelao said, this is a space talisman. If you encounter any danger, just crush this talisman and I will appear instantly. Yixuan was stunned, then hurriedly said, thank you. Needless to say, this surprised him. Yuelao nodded slightly, go. Yixuan cupped his fists, then turned and left. After Yixuan left, Yilan suddenly said, Yuelao, are you trying to recruit this person? Yuelao said softly, this person is extremely talented and arrogant. He won't be willing to serve others. Moreover, we need to be wary of this person. Yilan was puzzled, then Yuelao said softly, we can use him. Use him. Yilan understood. Yixuan's talent was too high and his combat power was strong. This kind of person would definitely not be willing to serve them. Moreover, that treasure was Yixuan's. If they obtained it at that time, Yixuan would inevitably have other thoughts. And now, their relationship with Yixuan was to use him. Both parties were working together and using each other. Yuelao suddenly said, before they arrive, don't act on your own. Having said that, he turned and disappeared. Wuyuan. After Yixuan arrived at Wuyuan, he secretly found Enlanxiu, Lian Wanli and Wuxia. In the courtyard, the four of them sat around a table. Wuxia looked at Yixuan. Brother Yi, you said that they are going to attack the sword sect? Yixuan nodded. They are waiting for someone. Once that person arrives, they will definitely start a war with the sword sect. When he spoke up to here, he paused slightly and continued. But in my opinion, the sword sect seems to have something to rely on. So, I'm afraid the matter isn't that simple. Wuxia nodded. Wuyuan is also preparing to take action against the sword sect, but the dean has some concerns now. Yixuan nodded. I came to you this time because I hope that you'll be careful. The former sect leader of the sword sect, Mu Fengqian, is very powerful. You must not fight him recklessly. What he was most worried about now was that the sword sect would target Lian Wanli and the other two. Enlanxiu looked at Yixuan. What about you? What's your plan? Yixuan said solemnly, annihilate the sword sect. Annihilate the sword sect. This was his current plan. Because the sword sects Yu Fengqian and Li Xianfeng were the only two people who knew that the world prison pagoda was still in his hands, they would definitely not let him go. If he didn't annihilate them, they would annihilate him. Wuxia suddenly said, Brother Yi, if there's anything you need, let me know at any time. Yixuan smiled. Definitely. Wuxia nodded. You guys chat, I'm going to cultivate. After speaking, he turned around and left. After Wuxia left, Lian Wanli suddenly said, I'll go inform Little Nine and the rest. After speaking, she also turned around and left. However, when she reached the courtyard's entrance, she suddenly stopped and turned around to look at Enlanxiu and Yixuan. I'm leaving. You won't do anything special, right? Yixuan. Lian Wanli laughed heartily and turned to leave. Yixuan shook his head. This woman? Enlanxiu suddenly said, let's go. Yixuan nodded. The two of them walked towards the back mountains of Wuyuan. Yixuan didn't conceal himself. Now that Wuyuan and the sword sect were at odds, he didn't believe that the sword sect would go crazy and come to Wuyuan to deal with him. Enlanxiu suddenly said softly, do you still remember Qingzhou? Yixuan nodded. Of course he remembered. Not only did he remember Qingzhou, he also remembered Qingqing, he still remembered the Yi family, he still remembered the state of Jiang, and naturally he still remembered Enlanxiu, who was dressed in snow-white clothes. At that time Enlanxiu was still in Guoshi. And he was still that youth who was filled with uncertainty about his future. Enlanxiu's jade-like hand lightly brushed her hair behind her ear and said softly, we're all changing. Yixuan smiled. It should be said that we're becoming mature. Enlanxiu stopped in her tracks. She looked at Yixuan. At that time I liked how passionate you were. I liked that drive you had. Yixuan asked, and now? Enlanxiu was silent. Yixuan said with a smile, have I changed? Enlanxiu shook her head. It's because this world is too complicated. The world is too complicated. Yixuan shook his head instead. This world isn't complicated. What's complicated is the human heart. As he spoke, he looked at Enlanxiu. In my heart, you'll always be that Enlanxiu who was dressed in snow-white clothes. Enlanxiu said softly, at Qingzhou at that time you would fight for your country. In your heart, not only did you have small feelings, you also had great feelings. Yixuan smiled. Is there no more now? Enlanxiu nodded. Yixuan said softly, Little N, do you think I've become selfish? Enlanxiu shook her head. I just feel that many things seem to have changed. Yixuan looked straight at Enlanxiu. I've never felt that I'm a good person, but I don't feel that I'm bad either. If the current me disappoints you, then I'm very sorry. But I won't change. Because this is me, I'm me. As he finished speaking, he turned and left. And Lanxiu stood silently on the spot and didn't speak for a long time. At this moment, Lian Wanli appeared before Lanxiu. And Lanxiu said softly, "Is he angry?" Lian Wanli asked, "Do you care if he's angry?" And Lanxiu nodded. Lian Wanli said, "It's not that you don't like the current him. You're afraid that he'll change into a person that you won't recognize." And Lanxiu nodded. Lian Wanli asked again, "Then where do you think he's changed?" And Lanxiu said softly, "I can't put my finger on it. I just feel that he's slightly different." Lian Wanli shook his head. As he said, "You've all become mature. Ask yourself, do you hate the current him?" And Lanxiu shook her head. Lian Wanli smiled. "Let me ask you. When he was in Azure City, he guarded the kingdom of Jiang. When he was in Blue Sword Sect, did he guard the Blue Sword Sect?" And Lanxiu nodded. Lian Wanli asked again, "When he was in the Never-Ending Starfield, did he fight for the Never-Ending Starfield?" And Lanxiu nodded again. Lian Wanli said softly, "He hasn't changed. Whoever treats him well, he'll treat them well. Whoever treats him badly, he'll treat them badly." At this point she suddenly laughed. And Lanxiu looked at Lian Wanli. "What are you laughing at?" Lian Wanli laughed. "I'm happy. Because I understand him better than you." Ah. With that she turned and left. And Lanxiu stood quietly on the spot, silent for a long time. Wu Wen and He Liantian watched Lanxiu in secret. He Liantian was about to go over when Wu Wen suddenly shook his head. "Let her think about it herself." He Liantian looked at Wu Wen. Wu Wen said softly, "Love is the greatest obstacle of the martial path. Of course it's also the greatest help. Whether it's hell or paradise, it's all up to her." He Liantian said in a low voice, "Those two girls seem to be interested in that kid. That's not a good thing." Wu Wen said softly, "It's indeed not a good thing." At this point he said softly, "I hope she severs her love with a single thought and only has the martial path in her heart. Then our Wuyuan might have another martial god in a few decades." Martial god. He Liantian's expression suddenly turned solemn. After the founding master of Wuyuan, there hadn't been another martial god in Wuyuan. He Liantian looked at Lanxiu and said softly, "I hope so." Wu Wen slowly clenched his right hand and said softly, "If there's a need, the old man can only interfere." He Liantian looked at Wu Wen in shock. "Master wants to forcefully interfere?" Wu Wen didn't say anything. He only looked quietly at Lanxiu in the distance. After Yi Xian left Wuyuan, he was in a rather vexed mood. The sixth person suddenly said, "Angry?" Yi Xian nodded. "A little." The sixth person said softly, "What are you angry about?" "You should be happy." Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. The sixth person said, "She's not doubting you, but she's worried about you. Do you know what's the most difficult between martial Dao and sword Dao?" Yi Xian shook his head. The sixth person said, "Stick to your original heart and never change." Yi Xian fell silent. The sixth person said again, "When I observed that little girl just now, she seems to have reached a bottleneck in the state of mind. If she comprehends it and resolves her martial Dao heart, her strength will definitely improve by leaps and bounds. And you should be her biggest obstacle." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "What do you mean, senior?" The sixth person said, "What I mean is that there are two paths in front of her. The first is to sever her emotions, completely sever all her thoughts about you. At that time, whether you're good or bad, human or ghost, it will have nothing to do with her. At that time, there's only martial Dao in her heart. The second path is to make love. She must understand her heart and strengthen her feelings for you. She will use love to enter martial Dao and martial Dao from martial Dao. At that time you might be the foundation of her martial Dao. Your position in her heart might even be higher than martial Dao." Yi Xian said solemnly, "Senior, which path do you think she will choose?" "The first one." The sixth person said, "Is there even a need to think about it?" Yi Xian was puzzled. "What?" The sixth person said, "Because of your attitude just now." Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. "My attitude wasn't that bad, was it?" The sixth person said softly, "Kid, you better go find her. Otherwise you might lose her forever." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What?" The sixth person said, "Once she chooses to sever her emotions and resolves her martial Dao heart, you'll be no different from a stranger to her. And that Wuyuan will definitely want her to sever her emotions. Who knows, he might use some methods to force her to sever her emotions at a critical moment." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression darkened. In the next moment, Yi Xian turned around and headed straight for Wuyuan. Soon Yi Xian returned to Wuyuan. However, before he could get close to Enlancio, he was blocked by Wu Wen and He Liantian. Wu Wen looked at Yi Xian and said, "Leave." Yi Xian was expressionless. "Seniors, please step aside." Wu Wen's eyes narrowed slightly. Yi Xian suddenly roared angrily, "Scram!" As soon as he said that, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body. Dragon soul. Dragon power. Emoka power. Not only that, but now that he was exposed, all the blood in his body started to boil. A blood-red aura directly forced Wu Wen and He Liantian back several feet. The sixth person's voice suddenly sounded. "This bloodline. P.S. There's one more chapter." Chapter 540. In front of Yi Xian, Wu Wen and the other man's eyes were filled with disbelief. The energy that had erupted from Yi Xian's body had actually pushed them back. Push back. Wu Wen stared fixedly at Yi Xian with shock in his heart. Is that the power of bloodline? In front of them, Yi Xian's body was trembling violently, and his smoke puppet was actually gradually turning blood red. Right at this moment, the world prison pagoda within Yi Xian's body suddenly trembled. In the next moment, a mysterious force enveloped Yi Xian. Gradually, the blood in Yi Xian's body calmed down. Yi Xian's pupils gradually returned to normal as well. A short while later, Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Senior, what happened to me just now?" The sixth person asked, "What does your father do?" Yi Xian was slightly stunned and then he said, "Why do you ask?" The sixth person said, "Nothing, I'm just asking." Yi Xian, the sixth person said, "That was the power of your bloodline just now, and it's already been suppressed by this lousy pagoda." Suppressed by the world prison pagoda? Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Why is it suppressing my bloodline? Is it afraid that something will happen to me? The sixth person said, "It's afraid that something will happen to you. Your bloodline is extraordinary and it might be in danger if it awakens. So, it directly suppressed it." Yi Xian fell silent. Bloodline? He didn't even know what the hell his bloodline was. All he knew was that he'd been the one who devoured that godly king's blood. Was his bloodline very powerful? Yi Xian shook his head and stopped thinking about this question. He paid no attention to Wu Wen and the other man, and he charged directly towards Enlancio who was nearby. He Liantian was just about to stop him when Wu Wen shook his head. "Let him go." He Liantian looked at Wu Wen and the latter said softly, "If he intentionally stops her, the losses might outweigh the gains. Let her make her own choice." He Liantian nodded. Not far away, Yi Xian rushed in front of Enlancio. Enlancio's eyes were tightly shut. She just stood there not moving at all. Yi Xian whispered, "Shaoan?" There was no response. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "Senior, what should we do?" The sixth replied, "I don't know." Yi Xian was speechless. "She's in a meditative state right now, but she can still hear what you're saying. Tell her not to sever her emotions. If she does, you'll find that she's no longer the person you know. Cut off all emotional ties." Yi Xian gazed at Enlancio, took a deep breath and said, "And I had thoughts about you as soon as I laid eyes on you. Oh no, it was a favorable impression. From the first time I saw you, I had a good impression of you. I don't know when it started, but someone else appeared in the depths of my heart. That person is you. After you left, I would miss you at least 3 times a day. That feeling was like a demon rat missing its rice. Day and night, every moment was torture." On the other side, Wu Wen shook his head. The old man can't take it anymore. With that, he turned around and left. He Liantian, not far away, Yi Xian continued, "Just now, someone told me that I might lose you forever. Do you know how I felt? Panic. For the first time, I panicked. If I lose you, what's the point of the sword Dao? What was the point of life? Life shouldn't just be about the way of the sword. I still want to have you." Not far away, He Liantian shook his head. Youngsters these days. After saying that, he turned around and left. Yi Xian still wanted to say something, but Enlancio suddenly opened her eyes, and there was a faint blush on her face. Yi Xian was stunned. He hurriedly said, "Shaoan," however, Enlancio shook her head and left. Just as Yi Xian was about to chase after her, the sixth person suddenly said, "You might be shameless, but she is." Yi Xian was confused. "What do you mean, senior?" The sixth person said, "Sometimes you seem quite smart, but why are you so stupid at other times?" Yi Xian, the sixth person said, "Let's go." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "I haven't told her clearly yet." The sixth person said, "What else is there to say? She didn't kill you, which proves that she didn't choose to give up on you." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Then why did she run?" The sixth person said, "Because you're too shameless." Yi Xian. At this moment, Wu Wen suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Wu Wen sized up Yi Xian. My Wu Yuan won't stop you and N, but now I hope that you can temporarily put aside your personal feelings. After all, you should be very clear about your current situation. Yi Xian said with a smile. Senior, are you afraid that I'll drag her down and implicate Wu Yuan? Wu Wen shook his head. I'm not afraid that you'll implicate Wu Yuan, I'm afraid that you'll drag her to death. Yi Xian fell silent. Wu Wen still wanted to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, what's your Wu Yuan's attitude toward the sword sect? Wu Wen looked at Yi Xian. What are you trying to say? Yi Xian said with a smile, if I'm not wrong, your Wu Yuan actually has killing intent toward the sword sect, but you're waiting for an opportunity. If that's the case, then we have a common goal, don't you think? Wu Wen looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian continued, I'm very grateful to Wu Yuan for taking in my younger sister and the others. No, the word, taking in, isn't appropriate. Because Senior is very clear that it's not a loss for Wu Yuan to have them join. If Senior feels that I'll implicate them and implicate Wu Yuan, I can bring them away. I believe that there are still many forces that are willing to take them in. Wu Wen looked straight at Yi Xian. We only hope that you can leave. Yi Xian said with a smile, no matter who it is, they won't be able to separate me from my younger sister and the others. Wu Wen shook his head. You're very selfish. Yi Xian said with a smile, I understand Senior's meaning. You hope that they'll cut off their relationship with me and stay in Wu Yuan peacefully, right? Wu Wen nodded. That's what I mean. Yi Xian asked, does Senior think that's possible? Wu Wen shook his head. Yi Xian, you're very monstrous and your accomplishments in the future will surely be extraordinary. The old man shouldn't have a problem with them befriending you. But intuition tells the old man that you're not simple, and it should be said that you're very complicated. There are too many mysteries and uncertainties about you. Just like that pagoda, it's not normal for such a precious treasure to be in your possession. The old man is afraid that you'll bring them into a huge whirlpool. Yi Xian was silent for a moment and then he said, don't worry, Senior. I hope that they're safe and sound more than Wu Yuan. With that he turned and left. Wu Wen sighed softly on the spot. He wanted to make Yi Xian leave and he even wanted to use force. But he didn't choose to do so in the end. Because Yi Xian had a deep relationship with his younger sister, and the others. If he did so, it was extremely likely that these little fellows would betray Wu Yuan. After a short moment, Wu Wen sighed softly once more, and then he turned and left. There was another reason why he'd given up, and it was because Yi Xian was sufficiently monstrous. Even though it might implicate N and the others, but if Yi Xian didn't die and was allowed to grow in the future, then Wu Yuan would be equivalent to having an extraordinary swordsman as external aid. After he saw Yi Xian and the others fight Dao realm experts, he knew that the future belonged to these young people. So, Lanxiu and the others befriending Yi Xian was beneficial and detrimental to Wu Yuan. After Yi Xian left Wu Yuan, he'd secretly found Bai Ji in a room. Bai Ji suddenly gazed at a nearby corner, and then she pondered deeply for a moment before she lowered her head and continued reading the scroll before her. Bai Ji sent a voice transmission. The last time you asked me to find her was at the sword sect, and I don't know where she went after that. Yi Xian frowned slightly. The sword sect? Bai Ji nodded lightly. She didn't enter the sword sect and she just stayed outside the sword sect for a while. After that, there was no news of her at all. Yi Xian fell silent for a short moment before he said, there's no news at all? Bai Ji nodded. That's very unusual. Because with her strength, it's probably impossible for her to suddenly vanish. Yi Xian fell silent. Why are my mother and father so mysterious? He didn't hate his father who he'd never met because his younger sister was fine. So he didn't hate anyone. Of course he didn't really care. In any case, he and his younger sister had been relying on each other for so many years, so it didn't matter to him whether he had a father or not. So long as his younger sister was fine, then Yi Xian's world was beautiful. Bai Ji continued. Are they going to act against the sword sect? Yi Xian nodded. They should be. Bai Ji spoke in a solemn voice. You have to be careful. As far as I know, the sword sect isn't simple, and they haven't revealed their true trump card. Moreover, the sword sect has been passed down for so many years, and some of the older swordsmen might be there. They might not care about the sword sect at ordinary times, but if the sword sect has the power to annihilate the sword sect, they will definitely take action. Yi Xian nodded. They're in charge of the frontal attack and I'm in charge of sneak attacks. If I can't win, I'll flee. Bai Ji shook her head and smiled. At this point she seemed to have thought of something and said seriously, there's one more thing. The previous sect master of the sword sect, Mu Fengchen, has left the sword sect and we don't know where he went. Sword Saint. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He left the sword sect? Bai Ji nodded. In short, the sword sect has been passed down for so many years. No one knows how deep their foundation is except for themselves. Yi Xian said, I'll be careful. You too. After saying that, he turned around and disappeared. Bai Ji softly said, I wish you all the best. Yi Xian came to the outskirts of Shenwu City. He quietly hid in the dark. What he needed to do now was to wait. Wait for Yuelao's reinforcements to arrive. On the branch, Yi Xian seemed to have thought of something. He opened his left hand, and a sheathed sword appeared in his palm. Looking at the sword before him, Yi Xian frowned. He was quite curious about this sword. What kind of sword was it? He hesitated for a moment and then tried to pull it, but the sword still didn't move. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Just as he was about to put it away, he seemed to have thought of something and directly returned to the prison pagoda. He came before Xiao Linger and handed the sword in his hand to Xiao Linger. Try pulling it. Xiao Linger blinked and then she took the sword. Then she gently pulled it. Buzz. A sword's hum suddenly resounded in the prison pagoda. The next moment Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. He directly left the prison pagoda. At this moment, a black cloud appeared above his head. Within the black cloud, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. At the same time, a powerful force of heaven and earth enveloped him. Yi Xian was speechless. P.S. I wish everyone a happy Dragon Boat Festival. I also wish all the college entrance examination students can get into the school of their dreams. Of course, I also hope that everyone can get into Tsinghua University. That way we will be alumni. Today the book review section will draw another 5 readers to send physical books. I will record the results of yesterday's draw and publish it on the book review section and public account. It will all be free. Chapter 541. Stop. At this time, the voice of the 6th floor came from the pagoda. Xiao Linger blinked, unable to react. The 6th floor said again, Little guy, stop. Xiao Linger looked up, blinking. Are you talking to me? The 6th floor said, Yes, stop. Xiao Linger was confused. Stop what? The 6th floor. At this time Xiao Linger looked at the sword in her hand. It was trembling violently, and there were cracks on the scabbard. Xiao Linger panicked. It seems to be coming out. The 6th floor said, Then why don't you put it back? Hearing this, Xiao Linger quickly put the sword back into the scabbard. The sword immediately calmed down. Outside the pagoda, in the void, lightning danced in the black clouds like silver snakes, lingering for a long time. Yi Xian's expression was extremely solemn. Danger. At that moment he had truly felt danger. If the lightning had fallen, he felt that he would have been burnt to ashes. When Yi Xian returned to the pagoda, Xiao Linger quickly handed the sword to Yi Xian. Her face was still pale. Yi Xian gently rubbed Xiao Linger's head, then looked up. Senior, this sword? The 6th floor said, This sword's killing intent is too heavy, it's not something you can control right now. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. What sword is this? The 6th floor said, I don't know, but from the sword's aura, it's not a good sword, you can't control it right now. Yi Xian looked at the sword in his hand and said softly, The sword sect should know where this sword came from. Xiao Linger suddenly pointed upstairs and said, Seventh floor, I want to go. 7th floor. Yi Xian collected his thoughts, looked at Xiao Linger. You want to go to the 7th floor? Xiao Linger nodded. Yi Xian was curious. Why are you going to the 7th floor? Xiao Linger blinked. Baby. 7th floor, baby? Yi Xian asked. Senior, do you know what's on the 7th floor? The 6th replied, I don't know. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Linger. How did you know there were treasures on the 7th floor? Xiao Linger blinked and said nothing. Yi Xian smiled and said, You can't tell me either? Xiao Linger lowered her head slightly. I can't say it. She asked me to keep it a secret. Yi Xian frowned. Who is she? Xiao Linger shook her head. This is our little secret. Yi Xian smiled. All right, I won't ask any more. But I can't enter the 7th floor. The 7th floor. Without the Tao Law, he could only sense the presence of the 7th floor, but he couldn't enter it. Xiao Linger looked at Yi Xian and asked, Can I use my sword to split it open? Yi Xian's expression froze. The 6th floor suddenly said, Some of this little girl's ideas are very dangerous. You better take precautions. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Little girl, don't be reckless. Understand? Xiao Linger pouted. All right. Just when Yixian was about to speak, he frowned slightly. Soon he left the world prison pagoda. As soon as he left the pagoda, a voice rang out in front of him. Come to the martial courtyard. Lian Wanli's voice. Yixian didn't ask why and directly disappeared. Wuyuan. In a courtyard, Yixian found Lian Wanli. Lian Wanli said in a deep voice. Shaoan is about to break through. Break through? Yixian asked. Creation realm? Lian Wanli looked straight at Yixian. It's the Dao realm. Dao realm? Yixian was shocked. Dao realm? How is that possible? One had to know that Enlanxio was only in the Sage realm previously. At this moment, Wu Wen suddenly appeared in front of Yixian. He glanced at Yixian and said, she entered martial arts through emotions and entered the Taoism through martial arts. Her state of mind was clear, and on top of that, she used to have an excellent foundation. Therefore she entered the creation realm directly. Yixian frowned. Entering the creation realm, then she immediately broke through to the Dao realm? Wu Wen shook his head. If that's all, then it's naturally great. However, her bloodline has awakened. Bloodline awakened? Yixian was stunned. Then he asked, what bloodline? Wu Wen was silent. Just as Yixian was about to continue asking, Wu Wen said, in short, she is like an arrow on a bowstring. She has no choice but to release it. As he spoke, he looked at Yixian. She is about to enter the Dao from the martial Dao. Yixian said in a deep voice. Entering the Dao from the martial Dao? Is that the Dao realm? Wu Wen nodded. The Dao realm is also known as the Dao initiation realm. I asked them to call you here because I hope that you can help protect her in secret. Yixian looked at Wu Wen. Senior, are you saying that the sword sect might come to cause trouble? Wu Wen nodded. It's not a possibility, it's 100%. That girl is a heavenly genius. Once she enters the Dao realm, ordinary Dao realm experts will not be her match. The sword sect will definitely not sit by and watch her enter the Dao. Yixian said in a deep voice. Can you suppress it? Wu Wen shook his head. No. She must break through now. If she forcefully suppresses it, it will ruin things. Because we cannot suppress the power of her bloodline, nor do we dare to suppress it. Moreover, the awakening of her bloodline is also an opportunity for her. After a moment of silence, Yixian asked. What do you want me to do? Wu Wen looked at Yixian. You help her in secret. Don't let anyone approach her. Yixian said in a deep voice. Senior, do you have confidence? Wu Wen shook his head. If all the experts of the sword sect gather together to deal with her, I have no confidence. As he spoke up to hear, his face turned bitter. This girl really broke through at the wrong time. Yixian said in a deep voice. I want to see her. Wu Wen nodded. Follow me. As he spoke, he brought Yixian and Moxia to the back mountains of Wuyuan. At the peak of the back mountains, Enlanxio stood quietly. Her clothes were as white as snow, untainted by a speck of dust. Yixian walked behind Enlanxio. Enlanxio said in a soft voice, You've come. Yixian nodded. He was just about to speak when Enlanxio suddenly said, Don't speak. Yixian was speechless. Enlanxio looked towards the distant horizon and said in a light voice, Did you mean what you said to me earlier? Yixian was stunned and then he said, Of course. Enlanxio nodded. I broke through. As soon as she finished speaking, she slowly closed her eyes. Yixian glanced at Enlanxio. With me here, no one can disturb you. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished silently. Following Yixian's retreat, all the powerhouses of the martial academy came out. Numerous formidable auras suddenly appeared in the surroundings of the martial academy. Not only that, there was a golden bell the size of a palm above Enlanxio's head. The golden bell emanated a ray of golden light that enveloped Enlanxio. Besides the golden bell, there were 4 golden flags that were over 3 m long around Enlanxio. The 4 flags directly locked down the space around Enlanxio. At this moment, the space around Enlanxio was impregnable, and even a Dao realm expert wouldn't be able to travel through space to arrive in front of Enlanxio. Moreover, there were numerous golden threads in the space around Enlanxio, and these threads formed a dense mass that locked down the space around her. If one looked carefully, one would notice that these golden threads were covered in mysterious talisman markings. These runes were drawn with mysterious runes, and the energy emitted by these runes was like a net that covered the entire space around Enlanxio. A creation realm treasure. No matter if it was the golden bell, the flags, or the golden threads, all of them were creation realm treasures. On the other hand, an old man stood atop the golden bell. This person was Wu Wen, the strongest expert in Wuyuan right now. This time, for the sake of Enlanxio's advancement, Wuyuan could be said to have mobilized all its experts. Such a young Dao realm expert, and one that was extremely likely to attain divinity in the martial Dao, was worthy of Wuyuan doing this. After Yi Xian left the sword sect, he directly went out of the city and found Yuelao and the rest. Yuelao looked at Yi Xian in front of him. You want us to protect that little girl from Wuyuan? Yi Xian shook his head. Yuelao's eyes flashed with astonishment. Then you? Yi Xian looked at Yuelao. This is our chance. The sword sect will definitely make a move against that genius from Wuyuan, and when they make a move, it's our chance. Yuelao said, it's indeed our chance. Speaking up to here, he looked at Yi Xian. Then when do you think is suitable for us to make a move? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, after the sword sect makes a move. Yuelao smiled. Do you think that the sword sect has a chance to stop that little girl? Yi Xian nodded, yes. Yuelao smiled. I will wait for them to stop that girl. If they stop that girl, Wuyuan will definitely take revenge on the sword sect. At that time, we can sit on top of the mountain and watch the tigers fight. If they can't stop that girl, it means that Wuyuan will resist them madly, and we can wait until both sides are injured. Yi Xian nodded slightly. This junior understands. After saying that, he turned and left. He knew that it was impossible for these people to protect Enlanxio together. These people will make a move, but they will wait until both Wuyuan and the sword sect are injured before making a move. Protecting Enlanxio, this matter still depended on him. After Yi Xian left, Yilan, who was beside Yuelao, suddenly said, the sword sect should know that we are in the dark. Do you think they will make a move? Yuelao said softly, they will definitely make a move. Yilan looked at Yuelao puzzled. Why? Yuelao said, the fight for the next generation. If no one in the sword sect can stop that girl, then they must eliminate her. Otherwise, the next generation of the sword sect will be crushed by that girl. Especially now, the sword sect and Wuyuan are like fire and water. Under these circumstances, if they don't make a move, what awaits them in the future is a slow death. So, they will definitely make a move because this is the best chance for them to make a move. Yilan said in a low voice, if they know that we are in the dark, will they do the same? Yuelao said softly, if they make a move, it means that they are not worried about us at all. If they don't make a move, it proves that their foundation is not as deep as we think. When that time comes, we will immediately make a move. I believe that those from the sword sect should be able to think of this as well. If we make a move, Wuyuan will wait for that girl to break through and reap the benefits. Our goal is that treasure, not to destroy the sword sect. However, if Wuyuan makes a move, they will definitely exterminate the sword sect. If you were the sect leader of the sword sect, what would you choose? Yilan looked in the direction of the sword sect. From what I can see, whether they make a move or not, their situation is not good. Yuelao said, it depends on how powerful their trump card is. If their trump card is powerful enough, they will definitely make a move against Wuyuan first. Since Wuyuan is making such a big fuss, they should be aware of the sword sect's trump card. No matter what, let our men get ready. Yilang asked, get ready to make a move? Yuelao smiled, get ready to watch the show. Rumor has it that the sword sect's founder and Wuyuan's founder had a close relationship in the past. If the sword sect and Wuyuan both summon their ancestor's clone, it will definitely be very interesting. Chapter 542. Wuyuan. At this moment, Wuyuan was on high alert, and all the experts were out. They only had one goal, to protect Enlanxio as she broke through to the Dao realm. Any force not only needed a foundation, but also fresh blood in the younger generation. Because these fresh blood guaranteed the future of a sect. Enlanxio was very young, and once she stepped into the Dao realm, she would be the youngest monster in Wuyuan's history to do so. Most importantly, Enlanxio's combat power was extremely strong. Once she stepped into the Dao realm, many of the older generation Dao realm experts would not be her match. There were many monsters in Wuyuan, and at this moment Enlanxio was the most dazzling one. For Wuyuan, Enlanxio must be protected. For Sword Sect, if they did not stop her, then in the future, if no super monster appeared in Sword Sect, the younger generation of Sword Sect would be suppressed for the rest of their lives. Especially at this moment when they and Wuyuan were like fire and water. The entire martial institution was on guard, but the Sword Sect was incomparably calm and didn't move at all. Yi Xian came to Tong Bao Chamber of Commerce. In a room, Yi Xian sat in front of Bai Ji. Bai Ji said softly, right now, Sword Sect is very calm. The calmer it is, the more abnormal it is. Yi Xian said solemnly, once they make a move, it will be a fatal blow. Baiji nodded. If more than 10 Dao Realm experts recklessly target Misen, Wuyun will not be able to stop them. Yi Xian's face was gloomy. A moment later he got up and left. Baiji looked at Yi Xian. Brother Yi. Yi Xian turned to look at Baiji, and Baiji turned her head. In the darkness 2 old men walked out. Both of them were Dao Realm experts. Baiji said softly, Old Lin, Old Xiao, go with young Master Yi. Both of them hesitated and Old Lin said solemnly, Girl, your safety? Baiji smiled and said, They won't target me now, go with him. The 2 of them looked at each other and nodded. Yi Xian said softly, Miss Baiji? Baiji interrupted Yi Xian's words, Don't say any more. Right now both you and Misen need manpower. Yi Xian nodded. Thank you. As soon as he finished speaking, he left with Elder Lin and Elder Xiao. In the room Baiji said softly, Sword Sect. How big is your trump card? Wuyuan. When Yi Xian returned to Wuyuan he did not show himself. Instead he hid in the dark. His greatest threat to the Sword Sect was hidden in the dark. In the dark, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. He wasn't far from Enlanxio, about 100 feet away. Looking at Enlanxio in the distance, Yi Xian suddenly frowned. The Sword Sect knew that Wuyuan was protecting Enlanxio. If they targeted Enlanxio, even if they succeeded, they would have to pay a heavy price. Under such circumstances, thinking of this, Yi Xian frowned deeply. A moment later Yi Xian entered the prison pagoda and found Xiao Linger. At this moment, the little girl was watering her spirit fruits. Yi Xian was also a little surprised because the inside of the prison pagoda was basically filled with spirit trees by this little girl. From the 1st to the 5th floor, they were all occupied by her. Yi Xian shook his head speechlessly. Did this little girl want to fill the entire prison pagoda? At this time Xiao Linger suddenly looked at Yi Xian and said in a crisp voice, When do we leave the 6th floor? I'm running out of places to plant them. Yi Xian, haha. A voice suddenly sounded from the 6th floor. Does this little girl want to drive me away? Yi Xian also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He squatted in front of Yi Ling and said seriously, Xiao Linger, big brother needs your help with something, can you? Xiao Linger blinked. Okay. Yi Xian pointed to the top of the pagoda. Go get a sword and come down. Xiao Linger didn't think much of it. She directly went to the top of the pagoda and came down with a sword. She came in front of Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian leaned over and whispered a few words in her ear. A moment later Xiao Linger blinked. Can I beat it? Yi Xian said seriously, You can. Xiao Linger asked again, Really? Yi Xian nodded. Really? But I'm a little nervous. Yi Xian. After a while Yi Xian calmed the little girl down. Then Xiao Linger carried the sword and left the prison pagoda. After Xiao Linger left, Yi Xian was silent for a moment. Then he looked at the wooden figure on the right. This wooden man wielding a long sword. Yi Xian walked in front of the wooden figure and gave it a sword of the manifestation realm. Then the wooden figure also left the prison pagoda. Yi Xian came to the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor was where the Emperor Dog lived. The Emperor Dog looked at Yi Xian. I understand. After saying that, it also left the prison pagoda. Yi Xian also left the prison pagoda. He looked at Enlanxio in the distance. What he needed to do now was to wait. Wuyuan was also waiting. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. In the blink of an eye it was night time. Enlanxio's aura was calm and there was no movement. As for the Sword Sect, they did not appear either. The experts of Wuyuan were also checking on the Sword Sect. As long as the Sword Sect made a move, Wuyuan would know immediately. 2 days passed. On the back mountain of Wuyuan, there was still no movement from Enlanxio. And in these 2 days there was no movement from the Sword Sect. The entire Sword Sect was dead silent. On the 3rd day, Enlanxio, who was on the mountain peak, suddenly stretched out her hands. She raised her head slightly and faced the sky. Around her, a faint red glow quietly appeared. The smell of bloodline. In the air, Wu Wen looked at Enlanxio with a calm expression. However, his divine sense had already covered the entire Wuyuan. If a fly entered, he would be able to notice it. In the dark, Yi Xian's expression also turned solemn. He knew that Enlanxio was about to break through. Once she broke through, she would be able to step into the Dao realm. Once she entered the Dao realm, Enlanxio's strength would definitely undergo a qualitative change. Moreover, Wuyuan would possess the youngest Dao realm genius in history. Of course, besides the founding ancestor of Wuyuan. After all, no one knew what sort of existence the founding ancestor of Wuyuan was. Meanwhile, the voice from the 6th person suddenly resounded in Yi Xian's mind. That little girl's bloodline is really extraordinary. Yixin looked at Enlanxiu and asked, Senior, exactly what sort of existence is the strength of bloodline? He still didn't really understand the strength of bloodline. The voice from the sixth person said, the strength of bloodline is the strength of blood. When some people attain a certain level, they're able to change their own bloodline, and this change of his will change the bloodline of his descendants as well. This bloodline is a natural advantage. For example, the reason many great powers and clans are able to be so formidable and possess so many monstrous geniuses is a huge reason, and it's the strength of bloodline. Just like this little girl before you. If she didn't possess the strength of her bloodline, then it would be impossible for her to directly enter the Tao realm. Yixin spoke solemnly, then isn't possessing the strength of her bloodline equivalent to cheating? The voice from the sixth person smiled, you can say that. However, the strength of your bloodline is a limit as well. Because if you're unable to break through the shackles of your bloodline after you've reached your limits, then it'll become a hurdle for you, a hurdle that you might never be able to overcome. Yixin gazed at Enlanxiu, Senior, is the strength of my bloodline more formidable, or is hers more formidable? The voice from the sixth person fell silent for a short moment before he said, her bloodline is comparatively normal, but yours isn't. There's no way to compare them. Yixin was speechless. Right at this moment, Enlanxiu's hand suddenly pressed down, and it didn't take long for strands of formidable aura to sweep out from within her. Moreover, countless black clouds suddenly converged in the sky above Wuxia, and a bolt of lightning flickered within the black clouds. Yixin looked up into the sky with a puzzled expression, what's that? The voice from the sixth person said, I don't know what it is. Yixin sent a voice transmission to Wuxia, Senior, what's that? Wuxia glanced at the surroundings, but he still hadn't noticed Yixin. He was rather shocked by Yixin's concealment technique. Even he was able to deceive Wuxia. Wuxia restrained his thoughts and said, this is the Tao tribulation. Once one steps into the Tao realm, one will experience Tao tribulation because it represents that she's on the verge of breaking through the shackles of this world. Moreover, the moment when the Tao tribulation descends will be the moment she's in the most danger. It's not a problem for her to endure the Tao tribulation, but it's extremely dangerous for her if she's disturbed by external forces. The slightest mistake might cause her soul to be obliterated. Obliterated? Yixin's brows knit together slightly. So, in this way, the moment the Tao tribulation descends is the best opportunity for them to make a move? Wuxia nodded, if they don't make a move now then they won't have the chance to. Yixin spoke softly, I understand. In midair Wuxia swept the surroundings with his gaze. Presently the sword sect still hadn't taken any action. This caused him to feel even more uneasy in his heart. Because he knew that this was the calm before the storm. Once the sword sect made a move, it would surely destroy the heavens and the earth. Wuxia went silent for a short moment before he turned around to look at Liantian, and he said via voice transmission, prepare for the worst. Liantian was shocked in his heart, yet he didn't say anything and just nodded before leaving silently. In next to no time, the might of the lightning emitted by the bolt of lightning in the sky above Enlanxiu grew stronger and stronger, and the entire sky darkened at this moment. Rumble. Lightning flickered within the layer of black clouds while numerous terrifying pressures swept down ceaselessly, and they pressed down to the point it was suffocating. Wuxia's expression was extremely heavy because Enlanxiu's Tao tribulation was even more terrifying than the Tao tribulation he'd encountered when he broke through to the Tao realm all those years ago. The stronger the Tao tribulation, the greater the potential and strength of the person charging into the Tao realm would be. If it was at any other time this would surely be a good thing. But now it might not be so good. Just like that, around 15 minutes later, the entire sky suddenly trembled violently, and then a bolt of lightning descended like a bolt of lightning under the gazes of countless people. At the instant this bolt of lightning descended, everyone felt a strand of formidable pressure. It was capable of destroying the heavens and the earth. Meanwhile, Enlanxiu opened her eyes, and then she raised her head to look up into the sky with a calm expression. Right when the bolt of lightning arrived over 100 m above Enlanxiu, a sword howl suddenly resounded from the northern sword sect. In the next moment, a blood-red sword shot into the sky from the sword sect, and then it shot violently towards Wuxia. Everywhere the blood-red sword passed, the sky was covered in blood red. P.S. I picked 10 readers in the book review section to send physical books, but only 2 of them contacted me. What about the other 8? If no one contacted me by noon, then I'll draw another one. In any case, I'll continue drawing 5 more today. Big brothers, you should take a look at the replies. After you finish reading, come back from time to time and take another look. Chapter 543. The Sword Sect had made their move. At this moment, everyone in Wuyuan felt as though they were facing a formidable foe. In the sky, wherever the blood-red sword passed, the sky was instantly dyed red, as though it was a huge piece of red cloth. The power contained within the sword caused everyone in Wuyuan to have a change of expression. In the sky above Wuyuan, Wuyuan suddenly bellowed in rage. Ancestral weapon. The voice faded. A long spear exuding raging flames soared into the sky from the martial courtyard. The long spear pierced through the sky, and wherever it passed, the space was directly incinerated. Under everyone's gaze, the spear and the sword clashed in the sky. Rumble. An earth-shattering explosion resounded in the sky. Countless sword beams and flames flew everywhere, and the space within 10,000 feet cracked into a spiderweb shape. Meanwhile, the space in the sky above the martial courtyard suddenly split open, and then numerous rays of sword light slashed out from within the space that had split open. In an instant, the entire sky above Wuyuan was covered in sword beams. Wu Wen looked at the densely packed sword beams, his eyes cold, but he still did not make a move. He could not make a move. He was the only one who could stop the sword saint from the sword sect. In the sky, He Liantian suddenly bellowed, "Out of the formation!" As his voice faded, numerous energy spears suddenly shot out from beneath Wuyuan. There were many of them and they all emitted a powerful spear intent. Very quickly the entire heaven and earth began to tremble. Rumble, rumble, rumble. These sounds rang out continuously in the sky above Wuyuan. Everyone in Xinwu City was shocked, and many people began to flee out of the city in a frenzy. The battle between the two biggest forces in the Divine Martial City could possibly destroy the entire Divine Martial City. Run. Countless people fled out of the city. Outside the city, Yuelao and the rest were quietly watching the direction of Xinwu City. Seeing the densely packed sword beams and spears in the sky above Xinwu City, Yuelao and the rest had solemn expressions on their faces. A formation like this was not something that a Dao realm expert could withstand. Even 10 of them might not be able to withstand it. Yilan replied softly, "This sword sect's sword formation is very powerful." Yuelao said coolly, "A faction that has been passed down for so many years, how can it possibly not have any trump cards? Moreover, what we've seen now shouldn't be their final trump card." Yilan nodded before asking, "When do we make our move?" Yuelao looked in the direction of Xinwu City. "Wait." Yilan nodded, then turned around to look at the 10 Dao realm experts behind him. 10. Other than that, there were still reinforcements that had yet to arrive. Yilan turned to look in the direction of Xinwu City, feeling a little puzzled. What does the sword sect have to rely on? Knowing that they were still alive, they still dared to launch a war against Wuyuan. Was he really that stubborn? Wuyuan. Not far from Enlanxiu, Yixin still hadn't made a move. Because the sword sect's experts had yet to appear. Yixin turned around to look in the direction of the sword sect. Based on the current situation, it seemed like the sword sect was serious. Once this battle started, it would depend on the true strength and foundation of both sides. At this moment, a voice resounded in the dark. "Little friend Yi, do you need us to make a move?" The person who spoke was Elder Lin of Tong Bao Trading Company. Yi Xian said solemnly, "Seniors, don't make a move for now." Elder Lin said, "Young Miss sent word that the sword sect might make a bigger move. You must be careful." Yi Xian nodded. Then he looked at Enlanxiu in the distance with his right hand gripping the soul-suppressing sword tightly. He wanted to see who would make a move against Enlanxiu first. Rumble. At this moment, another explosion resounded in the sky. In the sky above Wuyuan, countless sword lights appeared ceaselessly. Under the frenzied attacks of these sword lights, the entire space above Wuyuan was already shattered. However, the experts of Wuyuan still didn't make a move. They were waiting for the experts of the sword sect to make a move. They only had a single objective, to protect Enlanxiu as she broke through to the Dao realm. Suddenly, a thunderclap resounded in the sky, and it didn't take long for numerous bolts of lightning to descend incessantly towards Enlanxiu. Yi Xian's expression changed slightly, and he was about to make a move when the voice from the sixth person resounded abruptly, "Don't. Outsiders can't interfere in such a tribulation. Otherwise the tribulation will multiply." Yi Xian stopped and asked, "Senior, do all breakthroughs after the Dao realm experience such tribulation?" The voice from the sixth person said, "I don't know what the Dao realm of your world is. However, you're right. After one attains a certain level, every single advancement will cause one to suffer such tribulation. Endure it and you'll arrive in another world. If you can't, then you'll transform into dust on the spot. Yi Xian gazed at Enlancio with slight worry in his heart. The tribulation lightning was extremely formidable, and it was completely according to the standards of a Dao realm expert. It could be said that even a Dao realm expert might not be able to endure it. Moreover, the sword sect was watching from all directions. The sword sect. Yi Xian's expression gradually turned cold. He glanced at the surroundings and the experts from the sword sect still hadn't made a move. Meanwhile, the lightning had arrived above Enlancio. She clenched her right hand into a fist and blasted it upwards. Rumble. With a punch, those lightning bolts were directly shattered, turning into countless electric currents that vibrated in all directions. Yi Xian's expression turned solemn at the sight of this. Enlancio's strength is slightly heaven-defying. Meanwhile, a bolt of lightning silently condensed within the black clouds in the sky. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Senior? It's not over yet? The voice from the sixth person said, Generally there are 9 lightning tribulations and it's a narrow escape. It's over after 9 tribulations. However, this little girl's tribulation isn't the same as others, and there might be some variables. 9 variables? Yi Xian gazed at Enlancio. At this moment, although Enlancio seemed fine on the surface, her face was slightly pale. 9 times. Yi Xian's brows knit together tightly. Can Enlancio resist it? Right at this moment, countless rays of light suddenly split apart in the sky, and then an enormous sword that was 300 m long suddenly emerged from the clouds. Along with the appearance of this enormous sword, the countless energy spears below started to collapse inch by inch. Moreover, some of the mountains in the surroundings of Wuyuan had collapsed at this moment. Everyone looked at the enormous sword in midair. The enormous sword descended bit by bit, and it emanated an extremely formidable aura of the sword. The aura of the sword surpassed that of a Dao realm expert. Moreover, the target of this sword was Enlancio. Wu Wen gazed at He Liantian when he witnessed this scene, and the latter nodded slightly. In the next moment, He Liantian shot into the sky and transformed into a ray of white light that collided with the enormous sword. Rumble. The entire sky trembled. However, the enormous sword was still there, and He Liantian had returned to where he stood earlier. At the same time, the enormous sword in midair suddenly descended swiftly towards Enlancio. Yi Xian was just about to attack when a black-clothed old man suddenly appeared above Enlancio. In the next moment, the black-clothed old man held a spear in his hand as he shot into the sky. Bang! The enormous sword was forcefully stopped in midair, and the black-clothed old man swung his spear. At the top of the enormous sword, the black-clothed old man suddenly spun his spear. Rumble. The entire enormous sword shook violently before it cracked apart. In midair, the black-clothed old man stomped his right foot on the ground, and his spear pierced through the enormous sword. The enormous sword behind the black-clothed old man exploded into pieces. However, as soon as the enormous sword shattered, 10 other swords suddenly appeared around Wuyuan. At the same time, the blood-red sword in midair suddenly stopped moving. In the next moment, it flew into the sky above Wuyuan, and then a strand of monstrous aura instantly enveloped the entirety of Wuyuan. Moreover, there was a middle-aged man behind the red sword. He was the sword sect's Li Xianfeng. Wu Wen gazed at Li Xianfeng. You? Li Xianfeng looked down at Wu Wen and spoke coldly, hand over Yi Ling and Enlancio and we can avoid this battle. Wu Wen laughed coldly. Li Xianfeng, has your IQ been eaten by a dog? How could you speak such stupid words? Li Xianfeng spoke coldly, since Wuyuan doesn't know what's good for it, then I'll make Wuyuan vanish from the world today. As soon as he finished speaking, he pressed his right palm down lightly, and then he waved his left hand lightly while he chanted, The Tao of the sword reigns supreme in the world. Gather. Boom. The howls of 10 swords suddenly resounded. In the next moment, the 11 swords suddenly linked together, and the sword in the lead was that blood-red sword. Li Xianfeng pointed down lightly with his left hand, Break. As soon as his voice resounded, the 11 swords that were linked together suddenly shot down like bolts of lightning, and their target was still Enlancio. Moreover, a bolt of lightning just happened to descend from above Enlancio at this moment. A bolt of lightning and 11 swords. The expressions of Helian Tian and the others became extremely solemn. These 11 swords were too terrifying, and they weren't something that a Dao realm expert could resist head-on. Because these 11 swords were a formation. Only Wu Wen could resist them. Wu Wen raised his head and looked up into the sky because they were forcing him to make a move. Wu Wen gazed at He Liantian. He hesitated for a moment before he said, Where's the stone statue of Wu? As soon as he finished speaking, the ground on Enlanxio's left suddenly split apart, and then an enormous stone statue suddenly flew out. This stone statue was over 100 m tall, and it was like a pillar that could hold up the sky. After the stone statue appeared, it suddenly smashed its fist towards the sky, and this single punch caused the space in the surroundings to tremble violently. It was an extremely astounding sight. The 11 swords descended from the sky and slashed directly onto the stone statue's fist. Rumble. The stone statue's entire body trembled violently while countless cracks appeared on its arm. However, it forcefully resisted those 11 swords. Li Xianfeng laughed coldly in midair, and then he pressed his palms together before swiftly pressing them down. A ray of light suddenly erupted from the 11 swords, and it instantly pierced through the stone statue's palm. Meanwhile, the stone statue's left hand suddenly grabbed the 11 swords, and then it smashed them towards the ground. Bang! An enormous and deep hole was smashed open on the ground on the left of the stone statue. But in the next moment, the 11 swords pierced through the stone statue's palm and instantly arrived before Enlanxio. At the same time, over 10 rays of light suddenly tore through the surroundings and shot straight towards Enlanxio. All of them were Dao realm experts. The experts of Wuyuan hurriedly acted, but the swordsmen didn't pay any attention to the experts of Wuyuan, and they charged desperately towards Enlanxio. Some of them even risked their injuries to arrive in front of Enlanxio. Wu Wen's expression changed. At this moment he had no choice but to act. However, at the instant that he just acted, he suddenly turned to look at a certain cave on the right. There, a ray of light was shooting towards that cave. Wu Wen's expression instantly changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. Shit. Their objective isn't Enlanxio, it's Yi Ling. It's Yi Ling. Chapter 544. Yi Ling. All the experts of Wuyuan were shocked in their hearts. They'd thought that the sword sect's objective was Enlanxio, so they'd placed all their efforts on Enlanxio. However, they'd never imagined that Enlanxio was only a cover for the sword sect, and their true objective was Yi Ling. Who was Yi Ling? He was an extraordinary genius that wasn't inferior to Enlanxio. No matter if it was Yi Ling or Enlanxio, both of them were existences that Wuyuan couldn't lose. After he found out that the sword sect's objective was Yi Ling, Wu Wen was both furious and anxious. However, he couldn't separate himself at this moment because the sword sect's experts and the sword sect's sword formation were all around him. On the other hand, the experts of Wuyuan were charging madly towards Yi Ling's location as well. The first to charge over was Yi Xian. After he found out that the sword sect's objective was Yi Ling, Yi Xian was the first to charge towards Yi Ling's location. At this moment, his aura had practically erupted explosively like a volcano. Not too far away, Mu Fengchen raised his sword, and the entrance to the cave in front of him was directly transformed into powder. His expression was calm, and it was impossible to discern whether he was happy or angry. His objective had always been Yi Ling. Only Yi Ling could make Yi Xian come out and compromise. The biggest reason the sword sect was being attacked now was because the people of the world thought that the precious treasure was in the sword sect's hands. If this misunderstanding wasn't resolved, then the powers of the outside world would act madly against the sword sect. The only person that could resolve this misunderstanding was Yi Xian. Only Yi Xian could make the powers of the outside world believe that the precious treasure wasn't in the sword sect's hands. As for Yi Xian, if the sword sect wanted him to come out, there was only one way, Yi Ling. So long as those outside learned that the treasure wasn't in the sword sect's hands but in Yi Xian's, the sword sect's current situation would be instantly reversed. Not only that, but those outside would also turn against Yi Xian and Wuyuan. At that time, the sword sect and Wuyuan would be in a different situation. Otherwise, the sword sect would always be at a disadvantage. That was why he paid such a high price to attack Wuyuan. As long as they captured Yi Ling, Yi Xian would definitely compromise. Mu Fengchen was very confident because now that Wu Wen was pinned down, no one in the sword sect could stop him. However, the moment he split open the door of the cave, a sword slashed towards him. Mu Fengchen frowned slightly. He raised his hand and swung his sword. The two swords slashed against each other. Bang! The sword in Mu Fengchen's hand broke into two, and he was instantly pushed back by over 10 m. Mu Fengchen was dazed. It broke? My sword broke? Mu Fengchen looked towards the distance. There was a little girl in front of him, and the little girl was holding a sword in her hand. The little girl was staring at him, and there was slight panic in her eyes. However, she didn't retreat. Mu Fengchen turned his head to take a look and saw a figure rushing towards him. It was Yi Xian. Mu Fengchen paid no attention to Yi Xian, and he charged directly at Xiaolinger. Xiaolinger was stunned when she saw this, and then she turned around and ran. It was Yi Xian who asked her to run. Even though Xiaolinger had that sword, her strength was too much weaker than Mu Fengchen. In the beginning she had relied on that sword and the element of surprise to repel Mu Fengchen. Now that Mu Fengchen was mentally prepared, Xiaolinger was definitely no match for him. Mu Fengchen didn't chase after Xiaolinger. His target was Yi Ling. Just as he arrived in front of Yi Ling, a wooden figure suddenly stepped out from behind Yi Ling, and the next moment, a sword stabbed towards Mu Fengchen. The sword was as fast as lightning, and it was aimed at Mu Fengchen's vital point. Seeing that another person had appeared to block his way, Mu Fengchen's calm expression suddenly turned ferocious, and he stabbed with his sword. Bang! The wooden figure immediately retreated by 10 m, and at this moment, a huge black shadow slammed into him. Bang! Mu Fengchen was directly knocked to the entrance of the cave. It was the Emperor Hound. Mu Fengchen's eyes were cold, and just as he was about to attack again, Yi Xian had already appeared. This chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. Not only that, but Wu Yuan's Dao realm powerhouses had also appeared in front of him. Seeing this, Mu Fengchen's expression instantly sank. He knew that his plan against Yi Ling had failed. Mu Fengchen looked at Yi Xian. You were prepared. Yi Xian said indifferently, are you surprised? Mu Fengchen glared at Yi Xian, and the killing intent in his eyes was unconcealed. At this moment Wu Wen, who was not far away, appeared in front of Mu Fengchen. Wu Wen looked at Mu Fengchen coldly. Mu Fengchen, from today onwards the sword sect will decline. No, it should be that it will disappear. Mu Fengchen sneered, with just your Wu Wen? Wu Wen glared at Mu Fengchen. Everyone in Wu Wen, listen up. Don't let a single sword sect disciple escape. As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding Dao realm powerhouses charged out. In next to no time, a series of shocking explosions resounded outside the sword sect. Mu Fengchen glanced coldly at Yi Xian, and then he turned around and transformed into a ray of sword light that vanished. At the same time, a voice resounded in the sky above the sword sect. Everyone retreat. In next to no time, the sword sect's Dao realm powerhouses started retreating. Wu Wen sneered, want to leave? Chase after them. In next to no time, all the Dao realm powerhouses in Wu Yuan chased after the sword sect's Dao realm powerhouses. As for Yi Xian, he didn't chase after them. He directly sent Yi Ling into the prison pagoda, and then he went to Enlanxio's side. At this moment, Enlanxio was still overcoming her tribulation. As for He Liantian, he didn't chase after them as well. He was also protecting Enlanxio. In the sky above Divine Martial City, Mu Fengchen had just left Wu Yuan when a terrifying pressure suddenly crushed down towards him. Mu Fengchen waved his right hand, and a ray of sword light shot out. Bang! That pressure was directly slashed into pieces by the sword light. At this moment, Yuelao appeared in front of Mu Fengchen, and behind him were 10 Dao realm powerhouses. At the same time, Wu Yuan's Dao realm powerhouses had arrived as well. Now, all the sword sect's Dao realm powerhouses were surrounded. Yuelao looked at Mu Fengchen and smiled. Sect leader Mu, where are you preparing to go? Mu Fengchen stared at Yuelao and didn't speak. Actually, he had already expected this. Once they failed, these people would definitely come out and target the sword sect. Yuelao glanced at Mu Fengchen. Sect leader Mu, I'll say it again. Our objective isn't to annihilate the sword sect. As long as your esteemed sect hands over that treasure, we will turn around and leave immediately. We won't go back on our words. Treasure. Mu Fengchen's face was extremely cold. If that treasure was in the hands of the sword sect and he was being targeted, he would accept it. The problem was that the treasure wasn't in the hands of the sword sect. Aggrieved. This was the most aggrieved part of him. This black pot had always been carried by the sword sect for Yi Xian, and he didn't know how long he would have to carry it for. At this moment, Yuelao said again, so, have you thought it through? After a moment of silence, Mu Fengchen suddenly smiled. Seeing Mu Chen smile, Yuelao's eyes narrowed. Sect leader Mu, it seems like you don't intend to hand over that treasure. As he spoke, he looked at Wu Wen, who was not far away. Sect leader Wu, let's join forces. Wu Wen said indifferently, I have the same intention. Yuelao smiled, his smile was a little cold, and he waved his right hand. Kill. As his voice fell, behind him, 10 Dao realm experts directly charged towards the sword sect swordsman. Wu Yuan's experts also charged towards Mu Fengchen and the other swordsmen. There were close to 20 Dao realm experts. Wu Wen and Yuelao also locked onto Mu Fengchen. As long as Mu Fengchen made a move, the two of them would immediately attack. And at this moment, Wu Wen and Yuelao's expressions suddenly changed, and both of them roared at the same time, "Stop!" However, they were still a little dazed. Not far away, several black afterimages flashed by. As these black afterimages flashed by, the heads of two Wuyuan's Dao Realm experts directly flew out. On Yuelao's side, the heads of two Dao Realm experts also fell to the ground. In an instant, 4 Dao Realm experts had fallen. Soon, the Dao Realm experts on Wuyuan and Yuelao's side hurriedly retreated behind the two of them. This chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. And at this moment, 6 men in black appeared beside Mu Fengchen. These 6 men in black were faintly discernible, and their entire bodies were shrouded in black robes, and it was extremely strange. Wu Wen stared at Mu Fengchen. "These are not your sword sect's people." Mu Fengchen sneered, "Indeed, they are not my sword sect's experts. Why, only you are allowed to have allies, but my sword sect is not allowed to have allies." Wu Wen glanced at the 6 men in black. "Who are you?" The leader of the men in black suddenly said, "Sect leader Wu, our target is only that Yi Xian, and we hope that your sect will not interfere." As he spoke, he looked at Yuelao. "The same goes for you guys." Wu Wen sneered, "Our target is Yi Xian?" The men in black said, "If Wuyuan doesn't interfere, we will not make a move against Wuyuan." Wu Wen looked at Yuelao, and the latter said indifferently, "We can't let them touch Yi Xian." Wu Wen nodded. Actually, Yi Xian's life and death did not have much to do with the two of them. And the reason why they wanted to protect Yi Xian was because there was only one goal, and that was no matter what the sword sect and these mysterious people's goals were, they had to stop them. Right now, it was a matter of life and death, and the enemy of an enemy was a friend. Moreover, Yi Xian's strength was not weak. The men in black said softly, "Since that's the case, then Wuyuan will accompany him in death." As soon as the men in black finished speaking, the sky above Wuyuan suddenly darkened. The next moment, a huge black hole appeared in the sky above Wuyuan, and at the same time, a strange aura was emitted from it. Beside Yuelao, a Dao Realm expert said solemnly, "We have to retreat." Yuelao was silent. The Dao Realm expert continued, "Our reinforcements haven't arrived, so it isn't worth it to fight them head-on right now. Retreat now and allow Wuyuan to exhaust them is a good thing for us." Yuelao immediately nodded. "Retreat." As soon as he finished speaking, he and the 8 Dao Realm experts behind him turned around and left. Wu Wen's face instantly fell when he witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, the vortex in the sky suddenly started to revolve, and then a destructive beam of light erupted from within it. As soon as the beam of light appeared, the expressions of everyone here changed. Doomsday. Even the Dao Realm experts felt that doomsday had arrived. Wu Wen's expression changed drastically when he saw the beam of light, and he suddenly shouted furiously, "Summon the ancestor." As soon as he finished speaking, Helion Tian roared furiously, "Summon the ancestor." After a moment of silence, the statue at the entrance of the martial arts hall suddenly shattered, and then a woman with a spear in her hand appeared in the sky above the martial arts hall. The woman glanced at the surroundings with a slightly dazed gaze, but it didn't take long for it to clear up. In the next moment, she raised her head and frowned slightly before raising her hand and swinging her spear. Bang! The black beam of light shattered, and the enormous vortex shattered along with it. All the experts of Wuyuan instantly heaved sighs of relief when they witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, Mu Fengchen suddenly laughed savagely, "Do you think you're the only ones who have an ancestor?" As he spoke, he turned around and gazed towards the sword sect. "Summon the ancestor." As soon as he finished speaking, the statue at the entrance of the sword sect suddenly split apart, and then a man in a green robe appeared. As soon as the man appeared, the sword at the top of the pagoda within Yi Xian's body suddenly started trembling violently, and the entire pagoda was trembling. It was trembling madly. It was fear. Yi Xian was astounded, and then he hurriedly gazed towards the sword sect. There, the green-clothed man had suddenly opened his eyes and looked towards the sky. His eyes seemed like an ocean of blood, and at the instant he opened his eyes, the sky in an area of over 100,000 kilometers had instantly turned blood red. P.S. Please send monthly votes. I've chosen 10 readers yesterday and all of them have contacted me. There are a few who haven't contacted me yet. I'll name them. Sprite 250, Imperial Emperor Cutie. There are a few more that I'll continue to draw today. Thank you all for your support. Also, I'll basically read every single comment, no matter if it's good or bad, I'll read it seriously. Thank you all for your monthly votes and subscriptions, and thank you all for your suggestions and criticisms. End of this chapter. Chapter 545. As soon as the young man opened his eyes, it wasn't just the entire sky that instantly turned blood red, a strand of extremely powerful killing intent even blanketed the surroundings. The eyes of everyone here actually started to slowly turn red while they were enveloped by this killing intent. It was killing intent. At this moment, the hearts of everyone here were filled with killing intent. Even an expert like Mu Fengchen couldn't resist this killing intent. Right when everyone was about to be corroded by this killing intent, the green-clothed man from the sword sect suddenly closed his eyes. As soon as he did, the killing intent in the surroundings instantly receded like a receding tide, and the entire sky returned to normal. Everyone here gazed at the green-clothed man. Meanwhile, the green-clothed man opened his eyes again. But this time his gaze had returned to normal. The green-clothed man gazed towards Wuyuan, and then his gaze descended onto the founding ancestor of Wuyuan in the end. He grinned when he saw the founding ancestor of Wuyuan, and then he took a step forward and arrived in front of the Wuyuan's founding ancestor. Meanwhile, Mu Fengchen and the others hurriedly bowed respectfully. Founding ancestor. The green-clothed man glanced at the Wuyuan's founding ancestor and the others, and then he nodded slightly. After that, he gazed at the woman and was about to speak. However, the woman suddenly spoke indifferently. Your sword sect seems to intend to destroy my Wuyuan. The green-clothed man was slightly stunned, and then he glanced at the surroundings. It didn't take long for him to frown. What's going on? Mu Fengchen's expression changed and he hurriedly walked over to the green-clothed man and bowed respectfully. Founding ancestor, it isn't my sword sect that intends to destroy Wuyuan. It's Wuyuan that has colluded with outsiders to frame my sword sect. Countless swordsmen of my sword sect have died miserably at their hands. The green-clothed man gazed at Mu Fengchen. Lies? Mu Fengchen's expression changed. He was about to speak when the green-clothed man turned around and gazed towards the sword sect. A moment later, the green-clothed man closed his eyes slowly. At the same time, a ray of white light shot into the center of Mu Fengchen's forehead. At this moment, Mu Fengchen's figure was frozen on the spot. All the experts of the sword sect were shocked. A moment later, the green-robed man opened his eyes. At this moment he already knew everything. He turned around and looked down, and that was where Yi Xian was. Yi Xian's expression changed when he saw the green-clothed man as well, and he became vigilant in his heart. The green-robed man looked at Yi Xian. A moment later, his expression softened and he said with a smile, "Come forward." The green-clothed man looked at him. Yi Xian said, "Yi is of Yi of a sword." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What are you complaining about?" The blue-clothed man wanted to say something but hesitated. A moment later he opened his palm and from the top of Yi Xian's world prison pagoda, a sword suddenly flew out. Finally, this sword steadily fell into the blue-clothed man's hand. Tower-top sword. Yi Xian's expression changed. This green-robed man was indeed related to the sword at the top of the pagoda. The green-robed man looked at the sword in his hand and smiled. "Long time no see." The sword trembled slightly, and the cries of the sword shook the heavens. The green-robed man smiled and said, "I'll have to trouble you for a while." The sword trembled as if it was responding to something. At this moment, a blood-red sword suddenly flew in front of the azure-robed man. Seeing this sword, a look of surprise flashed in the azure-robed man's eyes. "It's you?" As his voice fell, he pointed at the blood-red sword. The sword shook violently. Soon a voice sounded from within. "I never expected to meet you in such a manner." The azure-robed man smiled and said, "I didn't expect it either. How have you been all these years?" The blood-red sword said, "Not very well. I met a fellow who sealed my main consciousness. If I hadn't met you, I'm afraid I wouldn't have any hope of recovering in this lifetime." The azure-robed man asked, "Who sealed you?" The blood-red sword said, "A woman. I can only blame myself. I was too arrogant in the past. So." The azure-robed man smiled and said, "It's not a bad thing." The blood-red sword said, "Indeed. Being sealed during this period has allowed me to understand many things." The azure-robed man smiled and said, "What do you plan to do next?" The azure-robed man fell silent for a moment and said, "I want to roam around again." The azure-robed man nodded. "Then we'll part ways here." The blood-red sword said, "We'll meet again." As soon as it finished speaking, it turned around and transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the boundless horizon. After the blood-red sword left, the azure-robed man looked at Yi Xian once more. It wasn't just the azure-robed man, Even the nearby founding ancestor Wuyan was sizing up Yi Xian. Her eyes carried a rare trace of gentleness. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled by her gaze. At this moment the surrounding atmosphere was quite awkward. Everyone had thought that after the two founding ancestors appeared, there would be a huge battle, but they hadn't expected it to turn out like this. In particular, the sword sex swordsman experts had ugly expressions on their faces. The azure-robed man suddenly looked at Yi Xian's abdomen. In the next moment, he opened his palm and a sheathed sword appeared in his hand. It was the sword that Yi Xian couldn't pull out. Looking at the sword in his hand, there was a trace of surprise in the azure-robed man's eyes. "It's you." The sword in the azure-robed man's hand trembled violently. The azure-robed man didn't say anything. He put the sword back into the world prison pagoda within Yi Xian's body, and Yi Xian took the opportunity to ask, "Senior, what sword is this?" The azure-robed man smiled and said, "The sword of an old friend. This sword isn't something you can control right now, so don't casually unseal it. Wait until you're strong enough before unsealing it." At this moment, the black-clothed man next to Mu Fengqian suddenly said, "We didn't come here to listen to your nonsense." As the black-clothed man spoke, the azure-robed man turned to look at him, and in the next moment the black-clothed man's head flew off. Everyone present was shocked. Instant kill. Mu Fengqian instantly broke out in cold sweat. The black-clothed man's strength was almost on par with his. He was instantly killed just like that? The azure-robed man said indifferently, "You won't be able to hear it now even if you wanted to." Saying so, he glanced at the remaining black-clothed men. "Is there anyone else who doesn't want to hear it?" The black-clothed men didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They turned around and left. The azure-robed man suddenly said, "Did I say you could leave?" They stopped, and one of the black-clothed men turned to look at the azure-robed man. "Your Excellency, we are—" Before he could finish, the heads of the black-clothed men next to him flew off. "Everyone," the azure-robed man looked at the black-clothed man. "What do you want to say?" "I'm listening." The black-clothed man fell silent for a moment before he said, "You're bullying the weak." The azure-robed man pointed at Yi Xian in front of him and said with a smile, "Aren't you guys bullying him?" The black-clothed man fell silent for a moment before he said, "Do you think you're very strong?" The azure-robed man smiled, "What do you mean by that? How should I answer you?" The azure-robed man laughed fiercely, "The strength of the organization behind us is something that you can't even imagine. You'll never be able to imagine it in your entire lifetime." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged towards the azure-robed man. However, he'd only just taken a single step when his head flew off into the air. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. There was slight fear in the eyes of everyone here. The strength of the sword sex founding ancestor is slightly too strong. The azure-robed man turned around to look at Yi Xian and he smiled, "Actually, I envy you." "Envy me?" Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. "Why?" The azure-robed man roared with laughter. "I was really miserable all those years ago." Yi Xian was completely bewildered. He was just about to ask about it when the azure-robed man gazed at Yi Ling who'd appeared by Yi Xian's side. There was a wisp of gentleness in his eyes as he gazed at Yi Ling, and then he pressed his fingers together and tapped lightly. A ray of light instantly shot into the center of Yi Ling's forehead. Yi Ling's figure trembled slightly, and then a powerful aura swept out from within her. The azure-robed man spoke softly, "I've undone the seal within her, so her current physique won't suffer any restrictions. You must protect her well." Yi Xian nodded, "I will." The azure-robed man nodded slightly, and then he seemed to have thought of something and gazed at Yi Xian's stomach. "It wasn't his doing that you were trapped. If you have any complaints, then feel free to look for the original owner of this pagoda. Of course you can look for me as well." After a moment of silence, the voice from the 6th floor resounded, "I got along very well with him, really." The azure-robed man looked at Yi Xian and Yi Xian nodded, "Senior has been very helpful to me." The azure-robed man nodded slightly, "That's good." The azure-robed man looked at the nearby founding ancestor of Wuyan, and the latter nodded slightly. She looked down at Enlancio who was still overcoming her tribulation. The Wuyan founding ancestor arrived by Enlancio's side, and she gazed at Enlancio as she said softly, "I'm quite surprised." The azure-robed man smiled, "I'm very surprised as well." The Wuyan founding ancestor nodded slightly, "Wait a moment for her." The azure-robed man nodded, "I have something to deal with." As he spoke, he turned to look at the nearby Mu Fengqian and the others. Mu Fengqian and the others hurriedly bowed respectfully. The azure-robed man spoke softly, "I said all those years ago that the Wuyan sword sect has been on good terms for generations. You should be aware of this, right? Mu Fengchen and Li Xianfeng instantly broke out in a cold sweat. The azure-robed man looked at Li Xianfeng. That day you told me that I was the one who harmed the sword sect? Li Xuanfeng's face immediately paled. The azure-robed man shook his head. I left this avatar here in hopes of helping the sword sect cross the fifth dimension tribulation in the future. I didn't expect it to be used by you. You are too outstanding. Mu Fengchen hurriedly bowed respectfully. We know our mistakes. The azure-robed man shook his head. Do as you wish. As he spoke, he turned to Yi Xian. Do you have any questions? Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Why is this pagoda on me? The azure-robed man said. There are many reasons. Of course, the biggest reason is you. Yi Xian frowned, puzzled. The azure-robed man smiled. She and I have always felt that you are what we think you are, but you are not. Of course, there are some things that are meaningless to tell you now. When you reach the 9th floor of this pagoda, you will understand everything. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then asked, This pagoda can lead to the 5th dimension? The azure-robed man nodded, Yes. Yi Xian asked again, Have you gone to the 5th dimension? The azure-robed man shook his head. Yi Xian asked again, Why? The azure-robed man said softly, Do you know why this pagoda appeared in this universe? Yi Xian shook his head. The azure-robed man looked at the horizon. It escaped. Yi Xian, the azure-robed man said softly, Someone is playing a very big game of chess, using all living beings as chess pieces. As he spoke, his mouth curled into a cold smile. Even the three of us are being schemed against. Yi Xian asked, Who? The azure-robed man looked at Yi Xian. I don't know. If I knew, I would have killed him long ago. Yi Xian. Chapter 546. Looking at the green-robed man in front of him, Yi Xian's heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. He knew that this man in front of him should be one of the masters of the 3 swords at the top of the pagoda. And this world prison pagoda could indeed lead to the 5th dimension. Yet, it had escaped from the 5th dimension. Also, who was the chess player the green-robed man spoke of? Yi Xian shook his head. There were too many questions. At this time, the green-robed man suddenly said, Don't think too much. Just do your best. Yi Xian looked at the green-robed man. Was this pagoda left to me by my father? The green-robed man smiled. It's not easy for me to answer this question. Let's change it. Yi Xian looked at the green-robed man and asked, Someone told me that my bloodline isn't simple. It should be said that it's a little abnormal. Does Senior know what's going on? The green-robed man nodded. I know. Yi Xian asked, What kind of bloodline do I have? The green-robed man hesitated for a moment before smiling. This is also not easy to answer. Let's change it. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Then can Senior tell me something I know? The green-robed man was about to speak when the Wuyuan ancestor walked over. She walked to the green-robed man's side. That's enough. The green-robed man nodded. He turned to look at Mu Fengchen and the rest. The sword sect went against my will. That was your choice. From this moment onwards, your sword sect has nothing to do with me. Not killing you is out of respect for my brothers in the past. This sword sect was founded by them and is their blood, sweat and tears. All of you are on your own. As his voice fell, his and the Wuyuan ancestor's bodies gradually turned illusory. Not far away, the Wuyuan ancestor and the rest bowed respectfully. Farewell, ancestor. The Wuyuan ancestor nodded. Finally, she looked at Enlancio below. Remember my words well. Enlancio nodded. The green-robed man looked at Yi Xian and said, From now on, walk on your own. Yi Xian was about to speak when the green-robed man and the Wuyuan ancestral master suddenly raised their heads. In the next moment, they looked at each other with a hint of doubt in their eyes. After a moment of silence, the azure-clothed man and founding ancestor Wuyuan suddenly soared into the sky. In practically an instant, the two of them had traversed through countless starfields. In the end, the two of them stopped in a starry sky. Not far in front of the two of them, there was a gravestone that was thousands of feet long floating in the air. The tombstone was pitch black, and beneath it stood a long-haired man. The long-haired man's upper body was naked and his eyes were covered. He supported the tombstone with one hand and stood there like an undefeatable god of war. And on that tombstone, there was a row of blood-red words carved. The first 4 blood-red words were especially eye-catching. Prison Yi Xian. Beside the green-robed man, Patriarch Wuyuan said softly, They're here. The green-robed man nodded. That's fast. At this moment, The man in the distance suddenly smashed the tombstone toward the green-robed man and the bare-robed man. With this smash, the starry sky around them began to collapse inch by inch. The green-robed man was expressionless. With a point of his finger, a ray of sword light slashed the tombstone. The tombstone stopped, but the green-robed man's sword light shattered and turned into nothingness. As for the tombstone, it was not damaged at all. However, an arm-long sword mark had appeared on the bare-robed man's body. The green-robed man was about to attack again, but at this moment, he had become completely illusory. The green-robed man shook his head. This is troublesome. As his voice faded, the lower half of his body had disappeared. In the distance, the bare-robed man did not attack again. The green-robed man looked at the bare-robed man opposite him. A ray of sword light twirled at his fingertips. He was about to attack when he seemed to have thought of something. He shook his head and smiled. I can't help him too much. As his voice faded, he and founding ancestor Wuyuan had completely disappeared. The bare-robed man carried the tombstone and continued forward. The direction he was heading in was the direction that the green-robed man and the bare-robed man had come from. Divine Martial Galaxy, Divine Martial City, Wuyuan. The sudden departure of the green-robed man and the bare-robed man stunned everyone here. They left just like that? At this moment, the atmosphere here was rather awkward. The relationship between the Sword Sect's founding ancestor and the founding ancestor of Wuyuan was clearly not ordinary. The Sword Sect was in the most awkward position. They hadn't expected that things would turn out like this after they summoned their founding ancestor. Their allies had been completely annihilated by their founding ancestor. That was like summoning an enemy. No matter what, the Sword Sect could be said to have suffered a huge loss. Not only had they lost so many Dao Realm swordsmen, but they were also blamed by their founding ancestor. Moreover, their founding ancestor had killed all the Dao Realm experts of their allies. So, the Sword Sect would definitely take the blame for that. When he thought up to this point, Mu Fengchen felt like killing himself. This time, Sword Sect had given up everything and lost everything. Mu Fengchen suddenly said, "Let's go." Li Xianfeng suddenly asked, "Just like that?" He was still a little unwilling to accept it. Mu Fengchen turned to look at Li Xianfeng. "What else do you want? What else do you want?" At the end of his words, he was practically roaring. Li Xianfeng could be said to have played a huge role in the Sword Sect's current situation. If Li Xianfeng wasn't his own grandson, he would have killed him a long time ago. It was Li Xuanfeng's foolish actions that brought the Sword Sect to this point of no return. And now, Li Xianfeng actually didn't want to give up. Li Xianfeng wanted to say something, but Mu Fengchen suddenly said angrily, "Look, what do we use to fight now?" "With what? With your head?" Now that the Sword Sect had suffered heavy losses and all their allies had been killed, the current Sword Sect couldn't fight against Wuyuan at all. Moreover, Elder Yuelao and the others were still outside. Now that they had lost their allies, once these people made a comeback, what awaited the Sword Sect was destruction. Li Xuanfeng's expression was extremely ugly, but a moment later, his expression returned to normal. Grandfather is right, grandson was foolish. Mu Fengchen coldly looked at Li Xianfeng. "Let's go." Li Xianfeng looked at Yi Xian, who was not far away. His expression was calm, no killing intent, no anger, just very calm. Yi Xian was silent. Li Xianfeng didn't say anything and left with a group of Sword Sect experts. The people from Wuyuan didn't stop them. Because if they were to stop them now, it would be a life-and-death struggle with the Sword Sect. If these Sword Sect Dao Realm experts were to disregard everything, it would be a devastating blow to Wuyuan. It could be said that Wuyuan would win, but it would definitely be a Pyrrhic victory. Wuyuan didn't want to do that. Moreover, there was no need for Wuyuan to do that. Right now, the Sword Sect was like a street rat. Countless forces would target them. Wuyuan only needed to wait for those forces to slowly grind the Sword Sect to death. Wuyuan turned around and looked beside Lanxiu. Suddenly, his expression changed because someone had disappeared. Sword Sect. When Mu Fengchen and the rest returned to the Sword Sect, they saw the mess of the Sword Sect. Everyone's expression was incomparably complicated. The glory of the past had turned into this in less than a day. Most importantly, not only did the Ancestral Master not help the Sword Sect, he even got rid of the Sword Sect's ally. Without the protection of the Ancestral Master, it could be said that the Sword Sect had lost a great trump card. Mu Fengchen shook his head. "Gather all the Sword Sect disciples and settle them down. Also, give up some territories in the city to Wuyuan." Everyone returned to Wuyuan. Behind Mu Fengchen, an old man nodded and quietly retreated. Mu Fengchen glanced at Li Xianfeng not far away. "If you have enmity or hatred, just keep it in your heart. Showing it out is the behavior of an idiot." Remember, a barking dog doesn't bite. With that he turned around and left. Li Xianfeng remained silent. Of course he hated it. What he hated the most was being played by Yi Xian. Being toyed with by someone weaker than him, how could he be reconciled to it? In particular, he was extremely unwilling to lose that precious treasure. But he was very clear that he had been overwhelmed by anger before. Li Xianfeng took a deep breath and lightly smiled. Yi Xian, we have started anew. As soon as he finished speaking, his expression suddenly changed drastically, and he suddenly drew his sword and slashed forward. As the sword slashed down, a figure in front of him was sent flying. This figure was Yi Xian. Seeing that it was Yi Xian, Li Xianfeng sneered, "So it's you. I didn't expect you." At this point, his pupils suddenly constricted. No. As soon as he said that, Yi Xian, who was flying not far away, suddenly disappeared. And a sword had pierced through the back of his head. Dreamscape. The second dreamscape. It wasn't just the second dreamscape, there was also the dragon soul, dragon power, and moke power. Of course, there was also the soul-subduing sword. This time he could be said to have used all his strength in this assassination. After the sword pierced through Li Xuanfeng's head, Yi Xian and his sword silently disappeared as if they had never been there. The moment Li Xianfeng disappeared, Mu Fengqian appeared in the field. When he saw Li Xianfeng standing stiffly on the spot, his hands trembled. Around him, the Dao Realm swordsman from the sword sect also appeared. One of the Dao Realm experts hurriedly walked in front of Li Xianfeng. At this moment, Li Xianfeng was still breathing. The Dao Realm expert examined Li Xianfeng, then looked at Mu Fengqian and shook his head. His soul has been injured by a mysterious power. There's no way to reverse it. Mu Fengqian walked in front of Li Xianfeng. Li Xianfeng grinned. I didn't expect that I would die like this. Mu Fengqian looked at Li Xianfeng and did not speak. Li Xianfeng looked at the end of the horizon and said softly, "My original goal was to make the sword sect famous and make swordsmen from all over the world join our sword sect. Unfortunately, greed brings harm. The word, greed, has not only blinded my eyes, it has also blinded my heart." As he said that, he looked at Mu Fengqian. Don't underestimate him. As soon as he finished speaking, his eyes no longer had any color. His soul was completely destroyed. His soul had truly been destroyed. Mu Fengqian looked at Li Xianfeng for a very long time. In the end he turned around and left. He came to the hall of the sword sect and looked at the statue of the man in green clothes. After a while, he shook his head and smiled. What's the point of having an ancestral master who can't protect the sword sect? From now on, the sword sect has nothing to do with you. As soon as he finished speaking, he slashed with his sword. The statue of the man in green clothes was instantly reduced to powder. P.S. The weather is hot but the room is cold. I just want a monthly ticket, but why does it seem so hopeless? Chapter 547. After killing Li Xianfeng, Yi Xian immediately left the sword sect. He did not want to be surrounded by the sword sect. The reason why he took the risk to kill Li Xianfeng was not because he acted on impulse, but because this person must die. Of course, whether it was Li Xianfeng or Mu Fengqian in Yi Xian's heart, they were all people who must die. He had no way to kill Mu Fengqian yet, so he chose to kill Li Xianfeng. Yi Xian did not want to keep his enemy alive overnight. If he could kill, he would kill. When Yi Xian returned to Wuyuan was also in a mess. Although Wuyuan won this war, they also paid a certain price, especially the group of black-clothed men that appeared at the end, causing Wuyuan to lose quite a few experts. Seeing Yi Xian, Wu Wen asked solemnly, "You went to the sword sect to kill Li Xianfeng?" Yi Xian nodded. Wu Wen shook his head. Impulsive. That Li Xianfeng and Mu Fengqian are master and disciple in name, but in reality they are grandfather and grandson. You killed Li Xianfeng, that Mu Fengqian will definitely seek revenge at all costs. Yi Xian smiled. If I didn't kill him, would they let me go? Wu Wen was silent. Yi Xian said softly, they won't let me go. Since that's the case, why don't I kill them first? He was very clear that although the sword sect's founding ancestor reprimanded the sword sect's Mu Fengqian and the others, that group of swordsmen will not change. After all, that founding ancestor is no longer a person of this era. Moreover, the sword sect knows that he has the world prison pagoda. Of course, even if the sword sect let it go, he will not let it go. This time, if it wasn't for him being prepared, Yi Ling will definitely fall into the sword sect's hands. When he thought of this, he wished for nothing more than to kill everyone in the sword sect. In front of Yi Xian, Wu Wen shook his head slightly. Forget it. You're not from Wuyuan and the old man doesn't want to care so much. With that he turned around and left. Yixin found in Lanxiu, Lian Wanli, Yiling, Mo Yunqi and the others. Everyone had gathered. This group of people were all from the Azure Firmament world. In the courtyard, Yixin said in a low voice, "Everyone, it might be your misfortune to know me because I feel that I will definitely have a lot of troubles in the future." He still remembered what the green-robed man had said when he left. It wasn't a coincidence that the World Prison Pagoda had appeared in his possession. It was as if someone had deliberately arranged for this to happen, and he wasn't too clear on the complexities of the situation. But he knew that this matter definitely wasn't over. At the side, Mo Yunqi chuckled. "Are you afraid of implicating us?" Yixin shook his head and smiled. "I've already implicated you guys." Mo Yunqi said in a low voice, "Actually, Bandit Yi, the few of us aren't weak either. I've also reached the Origin Realm, and ordinary Sage Realm cultivators aren't my match at all. After a period of time, it'll be easy for me to kill Creation Realm cultivators." Bai Zhe suddenly said, "His opponents are all Dao Realm cultivators now." Mo Yunqi, Yixin said in a low voice, "Brother Mo, Wuyuan is a good place. You guys can learn a lot of things here and you must cultivate well. In the future, I hope to fight alongside you guys." He knew that most of the time some people would disappear as they walked. And he didn't want to lose these friends in front of him. These people were all friends that he had gone through life and death with. Mo Yunqi smiled. "Bandit Yi, don't worry. We won't be left far behind by you." Yixin smiled. "No matter what, you guys are my friends, my brothers. This will never change." Mo Yunqi chuckled. "I'm not used to you being so emotional all of a sudden." Hearing this, everyone looked at each other and smiled. "Cultivate." Mo Yunqi suddenly stood up. "I won't waste any more time with all of you." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Bai Zhe stood up and left as well. And Lanxiu looked at Yixin. "What do you plan to do next?" Yixin said softly. "Take the initiative to attack." And Lanxiu nodded slightly. "Be careful." Yixin said, "All of you as well. Be careful of the Sword Sect and the Star Lord." The Star Lord. According to his guess, the group of black-clothed people that appeared earlier might have been sent by the Star Lord. And the appearance of these people allowed him to understand that even though Elder Yuelao and the others didn't believe that he had the World Prison Pagoda, there were still people who believed that he had it. In short, he didn't want to sit still and wait for death. After bidding farewell to Lanxiu and the others, Yixin left Divine Martial City, and he went to look for Elder Yuelao and the others outside the city. Elder Yuelao glanced at Yixin and didn't speak. Yixin glanced at Elder Yuelao and the others. "Everyone, do all of you intend to leave just like this, or do all of you intend to annihilate the Sword Sect and obtain that treasure?" Elder Yuelao said indifferently, "What do you think?" Yixin said, "If it's the latter, then the Sword Sect is weak right now, and it's our best opportunity." Elder Yuelao fell silent. Obviously he had some worries. Yixin shook his head lightly and smiled, and then he turned around and left. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly resounded from the side. "Is young Master Yi disappointed in us?" Yixin stopped and turned around to look. The nearby space had suddenly split open, and then a woman walked out. The woman looked to be in her 20s. She wore a long black dress and her long hair draped over her shoulders. She held a black folding fan in her hand. Behind this woman there were two elders. One of them wore a white robe and the other wore a black robe. Seeing this woman, Yi Lan and the others' expressions changed. They hurriedly walked in front of the woman and bowed respectfully. "Third young miss." Elder Yuelao didn't speak, and he quietly retreated to stand behind the woman. The folding fan in the woman's right hand lightly touched her left palm. Yi Lan and the others hurriedly retreated to the side. Yixin realized that Yi Lan and the others' faces were actually dripping with cold sweat. Yixin looked at the woman. Who was this woman? She actually made these Dao Realm experts fear her to this extent. At this moment, the woman looked at Yixin. She sized up Yixin and smiled. A man of striking appearance and monstrous strength. Not bad. Yixin said, "Miss, you're too kind." The woman smiled. "No, you're the first person I've praised." Yixin smiled. "Then I'm honored." The woman looked in the direction of Shenwu City. "I heard that the Sword Sect's founding master and Wuyuan's founding master have both appeared?" Yilan hurriedly nodded. "Yes." The woman said softly, "Rumor has it that these two are heavenly geniuses. It's a pity that I haven't seen them." Yilan respectfully said, "Third young miss is the true heavenly genius. In time, third young miss will surely surpass your predecessors." The woman suddenly looked at Yilan. "Am I that scary?" Yilan was stunned and hurriedly shook his head. The woman looked straight at Yilan. If I'm not scary, then why are you flattering me? Yilan broke out in cold sweat again. The woman calmly said, you're a Dao realm expert after all. You should have the demeanor of a Dao realm expert. Do you understand? Yilan hurriedly nodded, but he was laughing bitterly in his heart. This third young miss in front of him was not just any ordinary ruthless person. The third young miss looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Ye's goal is to destroy the sword sect? Yi Xian nodded. The third young miss smiled. You want to join forces with us? Yi Xian nodded again. The third young miss walked to stand in front of Yi Xian and looked straight at Yi Xian. Rumor has it that the treasure is not in the hands of the sword sect. It's in the hands of Brother Yi. Yi Xian smiled. What do you think, miss? The third young miss smiled. I hope young Master Yi can tell me. Yi Xian said, it's in the hands of the sword sect. The third young miss looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian smiled. See, you don't believe me again. The third young miss smiled. Brother Yi, to avoid unnecessary trouble, can I examine you? Yi Xian shook his head. No. The third young miss narrowed her eyes. What? Yi Xian walked to stand in front of the third young Mississippi. Although you look amiable on the surface, you're arrogant in your bones. Third young miss, I want you to understand that I don't insist on cooperating with you, nor am I asking you to cooperate with me. As he spoke, he looked straight at the third young Mississippi. Of course, if the third young miss is willing to let me examine you, then I'm also willing to let the third young miss examine you. As soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, everyone's gaze fell on Yi Xian. Yi Xian ignored everyone's gazes and turned around to leave. He knew the faces of many people very well. The more you take a step back, the more they'll take a yard after taking an inch. This kind of person can't be spoiled. As for cooperation, it's naturally good if he can cooperate, but it doesn't matter to him if he can't. In the end, he still has to rely on himself. Right at this moment, two old men appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian stopped in his tracks. At this moment, the third young miss behind him smiled. Brother Yi, you might have misunderstood. As she spoke up to this point, she walked to stand in front of Yi Xian and looked straight at Yi Xian. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm just telling you. Do you understand? Yi Xian suddenly struck with his sword. This sword was incomparably swift, and it directly slashed to the end in front of him. The third young miss didn't dodge and she just stood there. However, Yi Xian's sword seemed to slash at thin air. But the third young miss was still standing in front of him. The third young miss was expressionless. She was about to speak when she suddenly frowned. She raised her right hand to block. This block directly blocked one of the swords. Bang! The third young miss instantly retreated explosively. She had just stopped when the two flying swords slashed at her. The third young miss waved her lily-white hand lightly. Bang! The two flying swords directly shattered. At the same time, she suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, a figure directly flew out in front of her. It was none other than Yi Xian. The third young miss's mouth curled into a cold smile. But in the next moment, her pupils constricted, and she crossed her arms in front of her to block. A sword slashed down. Bang! The third young miss instantly retreated explosively by 300 m. At the same time, a wave of sword light enveloped the third young Mississippi. But in the next moment, a sword howl suddenly resounded from within the wave of sword light. In the next moment, a wave of sword light tore through the wave of sword light. The wave of sword light shattered, and the third young miss walked out with a sword in hand. The third young miss lightly tapped her sword forward. Crack! Something seemed to shatter in the surroundings. Along with this sound, everything returned to normal. The third young miss looked at the nearby Yi Xian. The triple illusion really surprised me. Yi Xian spoke softly, you're a swordsman. The third young miss walked towards Yi Xian with her sword in hand. Surprised? Yi Xian nodded, a little. The third young miss smirked. At this moment, the old man behind her was about to make a move, but she shook her head. I'll do it myself. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly disappeared. Her speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, she appeared in front of Yi Xian, thrusting her sword towards Yi Xian's chest. However, Yi Xian did not dodge and allowed the sword to stab into his chest. The third young miss's face changed slightly, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly rushed towards her, and his sword was placed on the third young miss's throat. The surroundings quietened down. The third young miss looked straight at Yi Xian. Try and touch me? Yi Xian slashed down with his sword. One of the third young miss's arms was sent flying. Blood spurted out like a fountain. The third young miss stared at Yi Xian. Do you know what you're doing? Yi Xian slashed again. The third young miss's entire left arm was sent flying. Yi Xian placed his sword across the third young miss's throat. Continue talking and I'll continue slashing. It's fun. Chapter 548. The entire place was silent. At this moment Yi Xian was surrounded by Dao realm cultivators. Especially Elder Yuelao, a black-robed elder and a white-robed elder who were glaring at Yi Xian with a murderous look in their eyes. They were already prepared to attack at any time, but they never thought that Yi Xian would be completely unharmed after taking a blow from the sword. This was too strange. Even though the third lady had lost both her arms, she still looked calm in front of Yi Xian. However, at this moment her thoughts had changed. The man before her was not afraid of her. He really dared to kill her. Furthermore, he was already prepared to kill her. She could sense the murderous intent in Yi Xian's sword. Yi Xian indeed had this thought. He did not want to make enemies, but if he had to, he would choose to kill them all. The third lady glared at Yi Xian. If you kill me, you and your friends will never have a day of peace. I'm not threatening you, I'm just telling you the truth. Yi Xian smiled. Even if I don't kill you, you'll still seek revenge on me, won't you? As he spoke, his smile turned cold and he was about to make his move. Young Master Yi. At this moment a voice rang out. A woman was slowly walking towards them. The newcomer's features were 70 to 80% similar to the third lady. She was dressed in a snowflake long dress and had a slender figure. Her features were exquisite and she was extremely beautiful. When they saw the newcomer, Yi Lan and the others hurriedly bowed. Greetings, eldest lady. Unlike before, there was no fear on their faces, only respect. The woman nodded gently and looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, have you thought about how to leave this place after killing her? Once you kill her, we will temporarily give up on the sword sect and seek revenge on you. Have you ever thought about your friends and family? Even if you can escape, can they? Yi Xian smiled. Miss, what do you think I should do? The woman replied softly. Young Master Yi, our target is not you, it's that treasure. But before that, we have to confirm if that precious treasure is still in your possession. If it's not with you, then I'm your friend. If it's with you, as long as you're willing to hand it over, we can still be friends. Yi Xian replied. You've already searched me. As he spoke, he looked towards Yuelao, who was not far away. Yuelao looked at the eldest miss and nodded slightly. The eldest young miss smiled and said, I still want to see it one more time, and it will be the last time. Because someone told us that the treasure has returned to you, and he asked us to give up on targeting the sword sect. Yi Xian was silent. The eldest young miss continued, Young Master Yi, this matter is beneficial to you as well. If the treasure isn't in your hands after my inspection, then from this moment onwards, many powers won't be keeping an eye on you. They will be keeping an eye on the sword sect, and so will we. If you don't cooperate, many forces will hesitate because they don't want to be used. Do you understand what I mean? Yi Xian looked straight at the eldest young miss. Let them retreat 100,000 feet away. Yuelao frowned slightly. Yi Xian, don't push your luck. Yi Xian ignored Yuelao and looked at the eldest young miss instead. The eldest young miss looked at Yuelao and the rest. All of you step down. Yuelao was a little hesitant. The eldest young miss said again, step down. Yuelao and the rest didn't dare to disobey and immediately stepped down. Soon there were only 3 people left. Yi Xian, the third young miss, and the eldest young Mississippi. Yi Xian let go of the third young miss and walked in front of the eldest young miss. Check it. Just as the eldest young miss said, he needed to prove that the treasure wasn't on him. Only then would those forces in the dark give up on him. Only then would those people be completely at ease and target the sword sect. The eldest young miss smiled and said, looks like young Master Yi is very confident in yourself. Yi Xian said indifferently, check it. The eldest young miss walked in front of Yi Xian and placed her right hand on Yi Xian's chest. Soon, a powerful force instantly enveloped Yi Xian. And at this moment, a sword was pressed against the back of the eldest young miss's neck. As long as the woman in front of him made the slightest movement, his sword would instantly pierce through this woman. And this sword was the soul-suppressing sword. If this sword went down, this woman would definitely die. The eldest young miss stared at Yi Xian. Her divine sense directly entered Yi Xian's body. At this moment, everything in Yi Xian's body was clearly seen. Of course, the World Prison Pagoda was not discovered. This World Prison Pagoda already had a bit of consciousness. When it actively hid, ordinary people couldn't discover it at all. A moment later, the woman withdrew her right hand and looked at Yi Xian. You don't have a dantian. Yi Xian smiled and said, yes. The woman took a deep look at Yi Xian and was about to speak, but Yi Xian quietly disappeared. And at this moment Yuelao and the rest appeared in front of the woman. The eldest young miss turned around and looked in the direction of Divine Martial City. It was unknown what she was thinking. Yuelao said solemnly, "Eldest young miss, is that treasure on him?" The eldest young miss shook her head. Yuelao said, "Then it is in the hands of the sword sect." The eldest young miss said softly, "This person's words cannot be completely trusted." Yuelao frowned slightly. "Eldest young miss means that it might be on him?" The eldest young miss nodded. "This person is quite mysterious. I can't see through him. Of course, that item might be in the hands of the sword sect. This sword sect might be doing that to divert our attention." Yuelao said solemnly, "Take down Yi Xian first." The eldest young miss said softly, "We have already lost our best chance." Speaking up to here, she looked at the third young miss. "I have told you 1,000 times, when you are outside, don't look down on the people of the world. You think you are ruthless, but there are people more ruthless than you." The third young miss was expressionless. "I was careless." Speaking up to here, she looked at the eldest young miss. "You obviously have the strength to keep him here. Why did you let him go?" Yuelao and the rest also looked at the eldest young miss. The eldest young miss looked at the direction of Shenwu City and said softly, "Keeping him alive is still useful. Whether that treasure is in his hands or the sword sect's hands, they must die." Yuelao said softly, "Eldest young miss wants to deal with the sword sect first, then you can make use of this Yi Xian?" The eldest young miss nodded. "Eliminate the sword sect first." The third young miss suddenly said, "Why not kill this Yi Xian first?" The eldest young miss looked at the third young miss. "If we kill him, who will help us deal with the sword sect?" The third young miss looked at the eldest young miss. "Eldest young miss, you are so sinister." The eldest young miss looked in the direction of Shenwu City. "Yuelao, send a message to the sword sect, tell them to give them one last chance. If they don't hand over that treasure, the sword sect will disappear from this world forever." With that she turned and left. Yuelao took a step forward, and this step directly arrived in the sky above the sword sect. As soon as he appeared, Mu Fengchen appeared in front of him. Yuelao looked at Mu Fengchen. "Sword Saint Mu, are you sure you don't want to hand over that treasure?" Mu Fengchen said indifferently, "It seems that you still don't believe that the treasure is not in the hands of my sword sect." Yuelao said, "You said that it is in the hands of Yi Xian, then what proof do you have?" Mu Fengchen asked back, "How did Yi Xian prove it to you?" Yuelao said indifferently, "He asked us to search you." "What? Is Brother Mu willing to let us search you?" Mu Fengchen sneered, "If I let you search us, will you believe that the treasure is not on us?" Yuelao looked straight at Mu Fengchen. "We won't." Mu Fengchen smiled, "Then come at me if you have the ability." Yuelao shook his head and smiled. "It seems that as eldest young miss said, your sect has a backer. Is it that Star-Lord?" Mu Fengchen sneered, "My sword sect will wait for you." With that he turned and left. Yuelao was silent for a moment, then turned and left. Outside Shenwu City. Eldest young miss looked in the direction of Shenwu City and smiled. "They are very confident." Yuelao nodded. "It should be that Star-Lord who interfered." "Star-Lord?" Eldest young miss said softly. "This Star-Lord has yet to appear." Yuelao said in a low voice, "Eldest young miss, do you think it is possible that this sword sect handed that treasure to the Star-Lord?" Eldest young miss shook her head. "If that treasure is in their hands, they will definitely not hand it over. No one is willing to hand over such a treasure." With that said, she frowned and looked at Yuelao. "That day Yi Xian handed it over voluntarily?" Yuelao nodded. Eldest young miss frowned even deeper. At this moment Yuelao said, "That day he was surrounded by us and the sword sect. He handed over this item to escape. This person knows how to let go. If he didn't hand over that treasure that day, he would definitely die." Eldest young miss said softly, "Did you find out the person behind this person?" Yuelao shook his head. "Our people went to never-ending star domain, and the person who destroyed the Star-Lord's clone that day was a middle-aged man. However, that middle-aged man has disappeared, and we don't know where he went." Eldest young miss looked at Yuelao. "We can't find out either?" Yuelao shook his head. "We can't. In short, this Yi Xian's background is not simple." Eldest young miss said softly, "How can it not be simple?" Yuelao said in a low voice, "If that treasure is not in his hands, then it is best for us not to be enemies with him. This person has grown to this extent at such a young age, he will definitely be a peerless swordsman in the future." With that said, he did not continue. The forces behind them were very strong, but Yi Xian was not weak either. Eldest young miss was silent for a moment, then looked in the direction of the sword sect. Destroy the sword sect first. With that, she opened her palm, and a voice transmission talisman suddenly pierced through the air. After a few breaths, in the sky above the sword sect, a 3 kilometers long rift had suddenly split open in space, and numerous roars resounded incessantly from the depths of space. At this moment, everyone in Divine Martial City looked in the direction of the sword sect. In the sword sect, Mu Fengchen looked up at the sky, and in the space split 12 people rushed out. These 12 people all wore black armor and helmets, and there was a long black saber hanging from their waists. Below them was a unicorn. The unicorn was several times larger than an ordinary horse, and it had a pair of black wings. Its hooves were like lightning and it moved as fast as light. Seeing these 12 people, Mu Fengchen's expression changed. At this moment he knew who the hidden force was. Tang Clan. The super aristocratic family of the southern wasteland world. It was rumored that the Tang Clan's cavalry was invincible on land. Mu Fengchen looked at the sky and said softly, Yi Xian? Even if my sword sect perishes, I will pull you down with me. P.S. Physical books, I can't give them to everyone, I'm really sorry. The reason why I only ordered 30 is because the price is really expensive because I ordered the hardcover edition, the paper material is hard, very exquisite. There are only a few copies left today. After sending them out there will be no more. Earth is also in the process of preparing for it. You guys will like it. Thank you everyone for your support, thank you. Love you all. Chapter 549. When the Tang clan had attacked the sword sect, Yi Xian had been in the library of Wuyuan, understanding the world. Ever since he had left Qingqing he had no idea what the universe was like. He only knew that it was very big. There were many detailed records about this world in Wuyuan. The book he was reading was called View of the World. This book had detailed records about the universe. From the book, he learned that the universe was endless and there were countless galaxies. The known boundaries of the universe were the southern wasteland, northern wasteland, western wasteland, and eastern wasteland. These 4 astral realms were the boundaries of the known universe. Outside the 4 astral realms was unknown. No one knew what was out there. The universe inside the 4 astral realms was called the chaotic universe. No one knew the origin of the name. There had been many brilliant civilizations in the chaotic universe. Among them, the most mysterious and ancient was the primordial race. Rumor had it that the martial arts civilization of the chaotic universe originated from the primordial race. They had disappeared for some reason and there were only scattered records. After the primordial race were the Shin clan and the Underworld clan. However, there were very few records about these 2 races. They only knew that they had disappeared mysteriously. After these 2 races came the chaotic era. The so-called chaotic era was when countless factions divided the chaotic universe. The chaotic universe was in a state of division. During this period, the chaotic universe was extremely chaotic. It wasn't until the first master of the Order Alliance appeared and established order that the chaotic universe gradually returned to normal. However, after that, the Order Alliance's talents withered. There was no one like the first master of the Order Alliance who could shake the all-heaven starfield. In the current era there were a few powerful factions. The first was the Order Alliance. Although it wasn't as powerful as before, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Moreover, the Order Alliance was still the nominal leader of the chaotic universe. Apart from the Order Alliance there were 5 super factions. They were 1 nation, 2 races, and 2 sections. 1 nation was the Theocracy. It was located in the eastern wasteland. The Theocracy could be said to be the most prosperous place in the chaotic universe. It had a vast territory and controlled more than 1,000 galaxies. Not only that, but it also had a prosperous martial arts civilization. There were also many mysterious orthodoxies such as the Confucian school, the Theocracy, and the military school. It could be said that after the Order Alliance, the Theocracy's martial arts civilization represented the entire chaotic universe. Back then, God Nation wanted to unify the entire universe, but they were stopped by the Order Alliance. The attacker was a Star Lord of the Lawful Order Alliance 3,000 years ago, Gu Tatian. This person could be said to be the most monstrous person after the first Star Lord of the Order Alliance. When this person appeared back then he shocked the entire world. When the Divine Nations invaded, this person went to the Divine Nations alone and never returned. However, the Divine Nation also retreated and never stepped into the Eastern Wasteland realm again. The world had almost forgotten about the Divine Nation. As for Gu Tatian there were many rumors about him. Some said that he killed God Emperor of the Divine Nation and left the chaotic universe. Some said that after he killed God Emperor he was severely injured and died. Some said that he was imprisoned in the Divine Nation. Many, many more. Below the Divine Nation were the two races. These two races were the Tang clan and the Monster clan. The demon race was located in the Western Wasteland domain and had an agreement with the first planet lord of the human race that the human race and the demon race would not offend each other for generations. The other clan, the Tang clan, was located in the southern wasteland world. The Tang clan was very mysterious. There was only one record about them. Their cavalry was unbeatable on land. After the Tang clan were the Wuyuan and the sword sect of Shenwu City. This was a special place. Especially the sword sect. No force dared to look down on the sword sect because no one dared to underestimate the swordsman's combat power. Since the sword sect's founding, there had been hundreds of sword saints, and among them, there were more than 100 extraordinary sword saints. At its peak, there were 38 extraordinary sword saints and 79 sword saints at the same time. This was the sword sect's most glorious period. During this period, no one dared to provoke the sword sect in the chaotic universe. Be it the Order Alliance or the Tang clan, everyone had to give the sword sect some respect. Moreover, the sword sect and the Wuyuan had been friends for generations and lived together in Shenwu City. Under such circumstances, no one dared to provoke Shenwu City. However, the relationship between the sword sect and the Wuyuan turned sour. In the library, Yi Xian closed the book in his hand. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian turned and disappeared. At the entrance of the Wuyuan Martial Arts Hall, Wu Wen looked in the direction of the sword sect and said softly, "It's the Tang clan." He Liantian shook his head. The sword sect brought this upon themselves. Wu Wen said, "If the sword sect perishes, only our Wuyuan will be left in Shenwu City." He Liantian looked at Wu Wen. "Master, you can't be." Wu Wen shook his head. "If the sword sect didn't have the ambition of wolves, our Wuyuan would not sit idly by this time. As you said, they brought this upon themselves." Saying this, he looked at He Liantian. "You must remember, as the sect master of Wuyuan, there are many times when a decision can bring disaster to Wuyuan. Therefore, you must be cautious in any decision you make in the future." He Liantian nodded. "Understood." Wu Wen looked in the direction of the sword sect. The sword sect's ancestral master has already shown his trump card. Let us see what other trump cards the sword sect has. At the sword sect. The moment the Tang clan's cavalry appeared, the entire sword sect acted as if they were facing a formidable enemy. All the sword sect's disciples appeared. In the eyes of these sword sect's disciples, there was fear and solemnity, but there was no fear. In the air, the 12 of them just stood there quietly. They were very quiet, just like virgins. At this time, a woman suddenly appeared in front of the 12 people. This person was the eldest miss of the Tang clan. Behind her were the second miss and the others. The eldest miss looked down at Mu Fengchen. "Sword Saint, my Tang clan has always respected the sword sect. As long as the sword sect hands over that supreme treasure, we will leave immediately. We will not go back on our words." Mu Fengchen smiled. "I have long heard that the Tang clan's cavalry is invincible on land. This time my sword sect would like to experience it." The eldest miss looked down at Mu Fengchen and nodded slightly. "All right." As soon as she finished speaking, the 12 cavalrymen behind her suddenly charged down like rabbits. Below, Mu Fengchen suddenly laughed. "Come. Activate the sword array." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of swords resonated in the sky above the sword sect. Then 12 swords suddenly shot up into the sky, bringing along countless sword rays. The eldest miss was expressionless and had no intention of making a move. As for the 12 cavalrymen, they did not dodge and swoop down. Everywhere they passed, the sword rays shattered and turned into nothingness. As for them, they did not even draw their sabers. Soon, the countless sword rays disappeared bit by bit. Below, Mu Fengchen suddenly charged up into the sky. Together with him were the 8 Dao realm swordsmen experts from the sword sect. In the sky, Yuelao was about to make a move, but the eldest miss shook her head. Not far away, as soon as Mu Fengchen charged into the sky, one of the cavalrymen drew his saber and slashed forward. Mu Fengchen's sword slashed out. Bang! That cavalryman instantly retreated hundreds of zhang, but Mu Fengchen also retreated hundreds of zhang. As for the 8 Dao realm experts from the sword sect, they were directly suppressed and could only passively take a beating. Seeing this scene, Mu Fengchen's expression changed. He had still underestimated these Tang clan's cavalry. The strength of these cavalrymen was not something an ordinary Dao realm expert could compare to. One must know that Dao Realm swordsmen's battle strength was already very strong, but facing these cavalrymen, they were actually suppressed. At this moment, a scream suddenly rang out. A Dao Realm swordsman was directly killed by two cavalrymen. Seeing this scene, Mu Fengqian's expression changed. Retreat. As soon as his voice fell, all the swordsmen retreated. At this time the 12 cavalrymen swooped down. There were clearly only 12 of them, but everyone from the sword sect felt like there was a magnificent army. Seeing this scene, Mu Fengqian's expression became extremely solemn. He didn't dare to let the sword sect swordsmen fight against these cavalrymen. He turned to look at the sword tomb in the back mountain of the sword sect. Summon the sages. As soon as his voice fell, 10 sword cries suddenly resounded from the sword tomb in the back mountain of the sword sect. In the next moment, 10 sword lights soared into the sky above the sword sect. In the sky above the sword sect, 10 swordsmen appeared. However, all of them were souls. Of course, they were also extraordinary sword saints. The souls of these 10 extraordinary sword saints were also one of the trump cards of the sword sect. In the sky, the 10 people looked up at the 12 Tang clan cavalrymen, their eyes filled with a trace of confusion. At this time, the leading swordsman looked down at Mu Fengqian. The latter bowed slightly. This junior is incompetent, and has disturbed the ancestors. The swordsman asked softly, did the ancestral master appear? Mu Fengqian nodded. He did. The swordsman slowly closed his eyes. Ancestral master? After a moment he looked up at the sky and said softly, I never thought that the sword sect would be bullied one day. Mu Fengqian's expression was somewhat ugly. The swordsman said softly, kill. As soon as his voice fell, the 10 people soared into the sky. In the sky, Yuelao said solemnly, eldest young miss, these 10 are extraordinary sword saints. Eldest young miss said lightly, just a strand of their souls. Yuelao nodded slightly, did not say anything. He looked not far away, where the 10 swordsmen were directly suppressing the 12 cavalrymen. Completely suppressing them. Seeing this scene, Yuelao's face immediately sank. Eldest young miss, however, remained expressionless. They are all souls, although their combat strength is strong, their consumption is too great. Just wait. Yuelao nodded slightly. As expected, as they fought, the bodies of the 10 extraordinary sword saints became more and more illusory. Seeing this scene, Mu Fengqian's expression became extremely ugly. He did not expect that these 10 extraordinary sword saints could not deal with these Tang clan cavalrymen in a short time. Gradually, the bodies of the 10 extraordinary sword saints became more and more transparent. Although they were still suppressing the 12 cavalrymen, they were unable to kill them. At this time, the 10 swordsmen suddenly stopped. The leading extraordinary sword saint suddenly looked down at the sword sect and said softly, no matter what the outcome is, remember, our sword sect will never compromise. As soon as his voice fell, he and the 9 swordsmen beside him turned and charged towards the 12 cavalrymen. Their souls were burning. The final blow. Chapter 550. As the 10 transcendent sword saints' souls began to burn, the aura they exuded skyrocketed. In the air, the leader of the 12 Tang clan cavalrymen suddenly shouted, defend! As soon as his voice fell, the 12 Tang clan cavalrymen wielded their sabers to block the attack. In an instant, a saber shield appeared in front of them. At this time the sword rays arrived. Rumble. Rumbling resounded incessantly in the sky above the sword sect. The Tang clan cavalrymen retreated until they were outside the divine martial city. However, the 10 transcendent sword saints' sword rays also disappeared at this moment. However, the 12 Tang clan cavalrymen were still there. However, they didn't have it easy either. Their faces were as pale as paper. Evidently, the final attack from the 10 transcendent sword saints had seriously injured them. The sword sect. Seeing the 10 transcendent sword saints disappear, the sword sect's experts' expressions changed. The leader, Mu Fengqian, was at a loss. The sword sect. Since when did the sword sect begin to decline? He didn't know. All he knew was that the sword sect had begun to decline several generations ago. In the sect, the number of sword saints decreased with each generation. Who was to blame? No one was to blame. Since ancient times, no force had been able to remain at the peak forever. The sword sect's decline was partly due to human factors, but it was mostly due to the law of nature and the general trend. When he took over the sword sect, he wanted to change. He wanted the sword sect to leave the sword sect and return it to its former glory. However, he didn't expect that the sword sect would fall into such a situation. At this time, an old man appeared beside Mu Fengqian. This person was Yu Wuchen, the old man who taught Yi Xian consciousness sword Dao. Because Yi Xian was forced to leave the sword sect, he had completely retired and never appeared in the sword sect again. But now he had appeared. Mu Fengchen looked at Yu Wuchen. Junior brother, am I wrong? Yu Wuchen said softly, you're too anxious. Senior brother, I agree that the sword sect needs to change. However, what you need to do is not change. What you need to change is ambition. Our sword sect is currently at its lowest point. How can we be ambitious? Mu Fengchen remained silent. Yu Wuchen continued, the founding ancestors' intention wasn't to stop our sword sect from developing, but to protect our sword sect. Have you ever wondered why our sword sect has enjoyed such a transcendent status for thousands of years? Because we don't fight. Therefore, my sword sect has always been aloof from the outside world for thousands of years, and all the major forces have always maintained respect for my sword sect. At this point he looked at Mu Fengchen. Senior brother, the founding ancestors' intention is not to stop us from fighting, but not to fight for immediate benefits. During our sword sect's peak, we had dozens of transcendent sword saints. At that time, the current sect leader's strength was even more heaven-defying. However, did he lead the sword sect out of Shenwu City? No. That sect leader and the current swordsman, what are they fighting for? It's the Grand Dao. Mu Fengchen looked up at the sky. The Grand Dao, Yu Wuchen nodded. We are strong. Who in the world dares to bully our sword sect? If our sword sect still had 10 transcendent sword saints, would the Tang clan dare to step into our sword sect? At this point he looked at Mu Fengchen. When you and Xin Feng coveted that supreme treasure, I've already told you that if a swordsman places all his hopes on a supreme treasure, it means he has no confidence in himself. Senior brother, you don't have any malicious intent towards the sword sect, but you are too selfish and ambitious. Our sword sect doesn't have the strength to support your ambition. Do you understand? Yu Wuchen understood very well that the sword sect's founding ancestor wanted the sword sect's future generations to study the sword Dao. The founding of the sword sect was not to dominate the heavens, but to provide a home for the swordsmen. Of course, at the same time, it was to ensure that no one dared to bully these swordsmen. And now, the sword sect had violated the sword sect's founding ancestors' will. Yu Wuchen was about to speak when the Tang clan's eldest young miss spoke abruptly. Are the two of you done? Yu Wuchen looked up at the young lady of the Tang family. The next moment he suddenly shot up into the sky. Boom. A sword howl shot into the sky. Mu Fengchen's expression changed drastically when he heard this sword howl, and his eyes were filled with disbelief as he looked up into the sky. At the instant that Yu Wuchen shot into the sky, the Tang clan's eldest young miss's expression changed as well. Meanwhile, two old men suddenly obstructed her path, and they were experts on the same level as Elder Yuelao. However, a ray of sword energy slashed down. Two bloody heads fell to the ground. It was an instant kill. In the next moment, a sword slashed down towards her. Her gaze was icy cold. She pressed her fingers together and a speck of black light appeared. Bang! An explosion resounded as the speck of black light instantly exploded, and the Tang clan's eldest young miss instantly retreated over 3 kilometers. She retreated until she was outside Divine Martial City. Meanwhile, Yu Wuchen suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground. Slash! A sword slashed through the sky from the sword sect, and it seemed like it could split the world apart. Meanwhile, 12 Tang clan's cavalrymen suddenly appeared in front of her, and they slashed their sabers forward at the same time. A 1,000-meter-long saber chi tore through the sky and slashed towards the sword. Rumble. The entire sky shook violently, and the space in an area of over 10 kilometers cracked apart. Moreover, the saber energy practically exploded apart in an instant. Meanwhile, the leader of the 12 Tang clan's cavalrymen roared furiously, again. The 12 of them overlapped and slashed down at the same time. A bright ray of saber energy tore through the sky. At the same time, the 12 of them vanished at the same time, and then numerous rays of saber energy slashed down like a storm against the sword energy. The powerful sword energy was forcefully stopped at this moment, and then a single breath of time passed before a saber tore through the sky and slashed the sword energy into pieces. At this moment a figure flashed by. A figure and a ray of sword energy. This person was Yu Wuchen. The 12 Tang clan's cavalrymen in front of Yu Wuchen suddenly roared in unison, "Break!" The 12 of them drew their sabers at the same time. A sharp sound tore the surrounding space apart. However, as the ray of sword energy arrived, rumble. The 12 Tang clan's cavalrymen were blasted out of Divine Martial City. In the sky, Yu Wuchen held his sword and looked coldly at Tang Clan's young miss and the others. Meanwhile, everyone in the sword sect was looking at Yu Wuchen. Or rather, everyone in Divine Martial City was looking at Yu Wuchen. Extraordinary sword saint. Yu Wuchen wasn't a Dao realm expert, nor was he a sword saint. He was an extraordinary sword saint. Below, Mu Fengshen looked blankly at Yu Wuchen in the sky. Master. Back then you didn't pass the position to junior brother because you wanted him to focus on the sword Dao. In the surroundings, countless disciples of the sword sect were also looking at Yu Wuchen. Their blood was boiling. Extraordinary sword saint. Yu Wuchen's appearance had undoubtedly allowed them to see a ray of light in the darkness. Wu Yuan. Wu Wen looked at Yu Wuchen in the sky with a grave expression. Extraordinary sword saint. If Yu Wuchen had attacked Wu Yuan that day, Wu Yuan would have suffered great losses. It might even have changed the outcome. A transcendent sword saint was one of the most supreme experts in the entire Chaosverse. Yi Xian was also slightly shocked. He hadn't expected that the old man who had taught him would be so strong. In the sky above Divine Martial City, Yu Wuchen looked at the distant eldest miss of the Tang clan. My sword sect doesn't want to fight. But if we have to fight, then my sword sect doesn't fear anyone. Eldest miss of the Tang clan looked at Yu Wuchen. An extraordinary sword saint wants to stop my Tang clan? You're thinking too much. As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her palm, and a voice transmission talisman shot into the sky. Bang. Suddenly, a huge crack appeared in the sky. In the next moment, a powerful aura came from the crack, and a middle-aged man walked out. The middle-aged man wore a tight black robe and carried a saber on his back. As soon as the middle-aged man appeared, the Tang clan cavalrymen bowed in unison. Greetings, honorable sir. The middle-aged man nodded slightly. Then he looked at eldest miss and bowed slightly. Greetings, eldest miss. Eldest miss nodded. Thank you, Honorable Xiao. Honorable Xiao smiled. It's my duty. As he spoke, he turned around to gaze at Yu Wuchen who stood nearby, and he spoke softly. An extraordinary sword saint. Please provide me with your guidance. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly drew his saber, and an expanse of light surged forward. At this moment, the entire sky was covered in this expanse of light. At the moment that Honorable Xiao drew his saber, Yu Wuchen suddenly pressed his fingers together and pointed forward. In an instant, a sword left a ray of light behind it as it tore through the sky. As soon as the sword appeared, the ray of light in front of Yu Wuchen was instantly torn apart. The sword shot forward and slashed towards Honorable Xiao. At this moment, Xiao Zuantong leaped up, and in the next moment, a long blade directly slashed the long sword. Bang! The sword was blasted flying, but it wasn't long before it was caught by a hand. Was Yu Wuchen. Yu Wuchen looked towards Wu Yuan and said, "Watch carefully." As soon as he finished speaking, he tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and suddenly vanished. In an instant, the entire sky above Shenwu City was covered in sword and saber lights. In the dark, Yi Xian stared at the sky. He knew that Yu Wuchen wanted him to watch. The two of them were fighting in close combat. The speed of the two of them was too fast, so fast that it exceeded his current understanding. Because after using the Dragon Soul, he could barely see the two of them clearly. He knew that this was an opportunity for him to reach a higher level of Sword Dao. As the two of them fought in the sky above Shenwu City, the entire space was shattered. Everyone was watching the two of them. The outcome of this battle would determine the fate of the Sword Sect. Without the Sword Sect's founding ancestor's soul as a trump card, an extraordinary sword saint could be said to be the Sword Sect's last hope. After about 15 minutes, the two of them suddenly separated in the sky, but the next moment, the entire sky was filled with sword and saber lights. In Wu Yuan, Yi Xian, who had been staring at the sky, slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, Tang family's eldest daughter suddenly shouted, "Kill!" As soon as her voice fell, the 12 people behind her suddenly rushed down. Below, Mu Fengshen's expression became ferocious. "All disciples of the Sword Sect, listen to my command, fight to the last man." Then he almost roared, "My Sword Sect will never compromise. My Sword Sect will never compromise." In the Sword Sect, the voice of countless swordsmen soared into the sky, resounding through the clouds. P.S. The demand for physical books is too high. I plan to order 10 more books, which will be the last 10. The reason why I won't sell them is that I can give them as gifts, but I can't profit from it because it involves copyright and other aspects. I have the right to give them as gifts, but I don't have the right to sell them. All of you should understand. You can leave a message in the book review section. Don't enter my activity post because there are too many comments. You can leave a message in the book review section because it's the easiest to win. For the last 10 books I will be stricter. I will read each and every comment. Also, I would like to thank all the readers who came to support me this time. Please subscribe to the original version. Thank you very much. Chapter 551. Never compromise. This was the spiritual belief of the sword sect. What was a swordsman? A swordsman who would rather break than bend. No matter how strong the enemy was, a swordsman had to have the courage to draw his sword. No surrender, no peace, and no compromise. There was only one word to describe it: fight. This was how the sword sect used to be. At that time, the sword sect didn't fight and didn't leave Divine Martial City, but would anyone dare to look down upon the sword sect? Even though the sword sect was at an absolute disadvantage now, not a single person was afraid. Sword intent. Countless strands of sword intent shot into the sky within the sword sect, and they circled in the air for a long time. Moreover, they were growing stronger and stronger. The eldest young miss of the Tang clan looked down at the sword sect with an emotionless expression. Never compromise? Let me see how tough the bones of the sword sect are. As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her head to look at Xiao Juntong. Don't hold back. In the sky. Xiao Juntong suddenly stopped, and his right hand held tightly onto the hilt of his saber. After a moment of silence, he suddenly drew his saber and slashed forward repeatedly. In an instant he'd slashed 10 times in succession. Bang! Every single slash from Xiao Juntong would cause Yu Wuchen to move 300 m back, and when Xiao Juntong slashed 10 times, Yu Wuchen had moved 3 kilometers back. Moreover, the space between them had become pitch black. The entire space had been slashed apart by Xiao Juntong's saber. However, it didn't take long for the space in the sky above the sword sect to return to normal, and a wisp of blood was flowing down from the corner of Yu Wuchen's mouth. The expressions of the sword sect disciples instantly became solemn when they witnessed this scene. Did he lose? Yi Xin looked up at Yu Wuchen in the sky as well. Did he lose? Yu Wuchen gazed at Xiao Juntong and Xiao Juntong smiled. Please provide me with your guidance. Yu Wuchen said calmly, as you wish. As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward. At the same time, he placed his sword against the center of his forehead. In an instant, a powerful strand of sword intent and sword chi suddenly converged within his body and into his sword. To be more precise, it converged at the tip of his sword. Crack. The space above the sword began to split apart inch by inch. In the distance, Xiao Juntong narrowed his eyes and gripped his saber tightly in his left hand. After a moment of silence, Yu Wuchen suddenly took a step forward. His left hand's fingers slid down the blade of the sword. Slash. The sound was like thunder. As soon as his voice resounded, a snow-white ray of light tore through the sky. A sharp tearing sound resounded. In the distance, Xiao Juntong suddenly unsheathed his saber and dashed forward. Behind him, countless afterimages appeared. Kill. As Xiao Juntong's voice rang out, a blade energy suddenly slashed at the sword light. There was a moment of silence. Boom. The sky suddenly shook violently as countless rays of light exploded apart. At the same time, a figure was blasted flying. It was none other than Xiao Juntong. The faces of the Tang clan's eldest young miss and the others instantly fell. At this moment, Yu Wuchen, who was still in the air, suddenly took another step forward. Again. As soon as he finished speaking, another ray of light slashed forward. Outside Divine Martial City, Xiao Juntong had just swung his saber when his figure was blasted flying again. Another 3 kilometers away. In the sky above the sword sect, Yu Wuchen took another step forward. This time the sword in his hand flew forward. At this moment, the ray of light was like a scorching sun, and it was so formidable that others didn't dare to look at it directly. Xiao Juntong suddenly laughed savagely, and then he drew his saber and swung it repeatedly. Rays of light shot out incessantly, but they were instantly shattered as soon as they appeared. Meanwhile, a ray of light suddenly flashed through the sky. Xiao Juntong raised his saber to block it, but the ray of light had already appeared behind him. The surroundings fell silent. Everyone was staring fixedly at Xiao Juntong. Crack. The knife in Xiao Juntong's hand suddenly split open, and at the same time, the space between his eyebrows split open. He lost. In the sky, the faces of the Tang clan's experts sank. However, the Tang clan's eldest young miss was still expressionless. Xiao Juntong looked at Yu Wuchen in the distance. What an extraordinary sword saint. As soon as he finished speaking, countless rays of sword energy suddenly slashed out from his body, and he was instantly sliced into countless pieces. Good. Countless disciples of the sword sect suddenly cheered. We won. Even Mu Fengqian's face relaxed. No matter what, he didn't want the sword sect to perish. In the sky, Yu Wuchen looked at the Tang clan's eldest young miss, and the latter suddenly clapped her hands and laughed. What an extraordinary sword saint. If the sword sect had a few more extraordinary sword saints, my Tang clan would really have to reconsider. Yu Wuchen looked at the Tang clan's eldest young miss. Is a life and death struggle good for your Tang clan? The Tang clan's eldest young miss laughed. Hand over the treasure and we will leave. If you don't, it's not a life and death struggle, but your sword sect will die. At this time, Mu Fengqian appeared in front of the Tang clan's eldest young miss. The treasure is not in the hands of my sword sect. The old man can swear on his soul. Hearing this, the Tang clan's eldest young miss narrowed her eyes. Swear on his soul. A sword sect swearing on his soul was no joke. Is it really not in the hands of the sword sect? The Tang clan's eldest young miss was somewhat puzzled. Mu Fengqian continued, that Yi Xian is a cunning man. Do you think his words are trustworthy? The Tang clan's eldest young miss fell silent. Just as Mu Fengqian wanted to say something, Yi Xian suddenly appeared on the right not far away. Everyone present shifted their attention to Yi Xian. Yi Xian. Mu Fengqian stared fixedly at Yi Xian. You caused my sword sect to fall into such a situation. What do you think? You're very proud of yourself, aren't you? Yi Xian smiled. Sect Master Mu, don't say that you're the victim. Isn't it your own doing that the sword sect has fallen to such a state? Mu Fengqian's right hand tightly gripped the sword in his hand. Yi Xian looked at the Tang clan's eldest young miss. Lady Tang, if you've investigated me, you should know that I, Yi Xian, might not be strong, but I've never betrayed my friends. What about the sword sect? I've already joined the sword sect, but the sword sect actually chased me out of the sword sect because of that treasure, and even framed me for stealing the sword sect's treasure. As he spoke up to here, he swept a glance at the sword sect disciples. The sword sect has placed a bounty on me, accusing me of stealing the sword sect's treasure. Then let me ask, does that treasure belong to the sword sect? The Tang clan's eldest young miss looked at Mu Fengqian. Sect Master Mu, I'd also like to know, does that treasure belong to the sword sect? Mu Fengqian's face turned dark, and just as he was about to speak, Yi Xian spoke up. It's fine if you're slandering me. In order to kill me, the sword sect actually went to Wuyuan to deal with my sister and friends. What did the sword sect go to Wuyuan for? To target a little girl. Where's your face? Where's your fucking face? Yi Xian. Mu Fengqian stared at Yi Xian in anger. Yi Xian suddenly barked. What about you? Old dog Mu, you and your grandson have killed so many sword sect disciples because of your greed, don't you feel heartache? Now that the sword sect has fallen to such a state, how can you face the ancestors of the sword sect? Mu Fengqian glared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, enough with this old man. The treasure is clearly in your hands. Yi Xian laughed coldly. In my hands? That day when I handed over the treasure, your sword sect threatened Yilan and the others, forcing them to leave Shenwu City. He then looked at Yilan, who was standing behind Miss Tang. Senior Yilan, you saw it with your own eyes. You saw it with your own eyes. How arrogant was the sword sect that day? They lied through their teeth, saying that the treasure belonged to the sword sect. They even threatened you. Do you still remember? Yilan glared at Mu Fengqian. How can I forget? That day the sword sect was really something. They even said that if we didn't leave we would never be able to leave Shenwu City. Mu Fengqian's expression was extremely ugly. Yi Xian continued, Sect leader Mu, you said that the treasure is in my hands. Then let me ask you, that day when the treasure fell into your hands, how do you think I was going to snatch it from the hands of so many powerful cultivators? Don't tell me that the treasure grew its own legs and can walk on its own? Mu Fengqian retorted angrily, it did walk on its own. As soon as he said this, everyone turned to look at Mu Fengqian. Yi Xian shook his head and sighed, you're shameless to this extent, what else can I say? Since you said it's in my hands, then it's in my hands. Yi Xian, don't bother arguing with you anymore. Mu Fengqian glared angrily at Yi Xian. He was so angry that he nearly spat out blood. Yi Xian ignored Mu Fengqian. At this moment, Mu Fengqian suddenly said, Yi Xian, do you only know how to talk glibly? Yi Xian looked at Mu Fengqian. Then shall we fight one-on-one? Mu Fengqian narrowed his eyes. As you wish. As he spoke, he was about to make his move. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly exclaimed in shock. You really want to fight me one-on-one? Where's your shame? Don't you have any shame? Mu Fengchen stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. At this moment he had regained his composure. He realized that Yi Xian was purposely trying to provoke him so that he would make a mistake. At this time Yu Wuchen looked at Yi Xian with complicated feelings. When Yi Xian came to Sword Sect, he fancied Yi Xian's talent and potential. Unfortunately, the Sword Sect pushed this genius away with their own hands. What he didn't expect was that the Sword Sect not only pushed Yi Xian away, but also wanted to kill him. Now the Sword Sect and Yi Xian had no chance of redemption. Because the Sword Sect was too ruthless. Yu Wuchen sighed in a low voice, "Kid, since things have come to this, I don't want to say anything more. You and the old man are on different sides now. The old man will not show mercy to you because I am a member of Sword Sect." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." Yu Wuchen turned to look at Miss Tang. "If you don't believe me, the sect leader of Sword Sect, the old man swears on his soul that the treasure is not in the hands of Sword Sect." Lady Tang smiled. "So, it's in the hands of young Master Yi." Yu Wuchen said, "This thing has a spirit. It's not strange for it to run away by itself, isn't it? Moreover, the old man believes that with Lady Tang's wisdom, she should be able to understand many things." Lady Tang looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Young Master Yi, do you have anything to say?" Yi Xian shook his head. "No." Mu Fengchen looked at Yi Xian and sneered, "Aren't you very talkative? Go on." At this time Lady Tang suddenly said, "No, that treasure is not in young Master Ye's hands. It's in the hands of your Sword Sect." Mu Fengchen looked at Lady Tang in astonishment, but the latter was expressionless. She opened her palm, and another voice transmission talisman soared into the sky. The next moment the space above the Sword Sect suddenly cracked, and several powerful auras swept out from the crack. Yu Wuchen stared at Lady Tang. "Since we're enemies we should kill them all, right?" Lady Tang's lips curled up. "The Sword Sect has been preparing for many years. Since we're here, how can we return empty-handed?" Then she looked at Yi Xian. "Young Master Yi, can you help us?" Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, "Sorry, my stomach hurts. Talk to you later." After saying that he turned around and ran. Everyone was dumbfounded. Yi Xian ran very fast. He knew very well that after this Lady Tang dealt with the Sword Sect, she would definitely come after him immediately. This woman was very shrewd. Chapter 552. Eldest Miss Tang hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually turn around and run away. Obviously Yi Xian had seen through her intentions. At this moment the atmosphere was slightly awkward. Destroy the Sword Sect or not? Eldest Miss Tang remained silent. If it was destroyed, then the Sword Sect would definitely fight to the death, and the Tang family would definitely have to pay a price. If it wasn't destroyed, then they would have shed all pretenses with the Sword Sect. Moreover, the Sword Sect was at its weakest right now. If they didn't destroy it now, then once the Sword Sect recovered, they would have to pay a huge price if they wanted to destroy the Sword Sect. Destroy it? Not destroy it? Eldest Miss Tang was hesitating. On the other hand, everyone from the Sword Sect was looking at the woman who stood before them. Any decision she made might change the fate of the Sword Sect. Needless to say, Yu Wuchen felt helpless at this moment, or rather he felt slightly sad. Since when did the Sword Sect have to live by the whims of others? But now the Sword Sect couldn't be unyielding. If they didn't fight to the death with the Wuyuan sect, then the Sword Sect would have no problem protecting itself with the formations and the ancestral souls. But now the Sword Sect had suffered heavy losses, and they couldn't fight the Tang family to the death. So, it was best not to fight if they could. The decision to fight or not didn't lie in the hands of the Sword Sect, but in the hands of the Tang family. Right at this moment Yilan suddenly said, "Eldest Miss, if we don't destroy the Sword Sect now, then once the Sword Sect takes revenge in the future. Moreover, the Sword Sect has been accumulating wealth for many years. If we can obtain the wealth of the Sword Sect, you should know that the family is expanding and needs wealth. If we can obtain the wealth of the Sword Sect, then we won't have to worry about wealth for the next few years." The eldest daughter of the Tang family remained silent and did not speak. Yilan continued, "Besides, the Sword Sect is obviously in cahoots with the Order Alliance. If we let them go this time, they will definitely side with the Order Alliance. On the other hand, once we enter into conflict with the Order Alliance in the future, the Sword Sect will definitely take revenge against us. So, I suggest that we pay a small price to annihilate the Sword Sect. Especially now that the Sword Sect has lost its ancestor's clone, it's the best opportunity for us to act." When he spoke up to here, he hesitated for a moment and said, "Eldest young miss, so long as we annihilate the Sword Sect, then even if that treasure isn't in the sword sect's possession, we can just look for Yi Xian. But if we don't destroy this sword sect, once this sword sect joins hands with Yi Xian and Wu Yuan, it will be extremely disadvantageous to us if the Star Lord gets involved. If we destroy the sword sect and Yi Xian is the only one left, Wu Yuan would never be able to protect him. By then, it would be much easier for us to deal with him. Even if Wu Yuan were to protect him, it wouldn't be difficult for us. The eldest young Miss Tang looked at Yu Wuchen in the distance. I wonder if the sect is interested in joining the Tang clan? Everyone turned to look at the eldest young Miss Tang when they heard this. Even Yi Lan stared at the eldest young miss in disbelief. This eldest young miss is even more ruthless than me. She wants to subdue the sword sect? Yu Wuchen's expression instantly turned gloomy when he heard the eldest young Miss Tang's words. You want the sword sect to submit to the Tang clan? The eldest young Miss Tang smiled. Your Excellency, we're working together. Yu Wuchen laughed icily. Working together? Do you believe that? The eldest young Miss Tang smiled. It looks like the sect has no intention of working together with the Tang clan. Yu Wuchen looked at the sword sect disciples below him. Are you willing to surrender? Surrender? The sword sect disciples below him roared in unison. Ning Zhan dies. Yu Wuchen turned to look at the eldest young Miss Tang. Are you aware of the sword sect's attitude? The eldest young Miss Tang replied indifferently. Ning Zhan dies? Fine, I'll fulfill your wish. As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her palm and there was a voice transmission talisman in her palm. Suddenly, Yu Wuchen, who was standing not too far away from her, suddenly vanished and a ray of sword light slashed towards the eldest young Miss Tang. It was obvious that Yu Wuchen wanted to strike first to gain the upper hand. Since the Tang clan was unwilling to give up, the sword sect would naturally strike first before the powerhouses of the Tang clan arrived. Yu Wuchen's attack was extremely swift and he arrived in front of the eldest young Miss Tang in the blink of an eye. The eldest young Miss Tang remained expressionless and did not dodge. However, right when Yu Wuchen's sword was 1.5 m away from her, a shadow suddenly appeared in front of Yu Wuchen. In the next moment, a saber struck the tip of Yu Wuchen's sword. Bang! Yu Wuchen instantly returned to where he stood earlier. Everyone looked towards the eldest young Miss Tang. There was a figure in black armor standing in front of her. The figure was tall and around twice the size of an ordinary person, and he wore a black helmet that concealed his appearance. Moreover, there was a sheathed saber hanging from his waist. Yu Wuchen gazed at the armored figure with a solemn expression in his eyes. Meanwhile, Lady Tang suddenly said, Will the sword sect surrender or not? When she spoke up to this point, she suddenly chuckled. The sword sect will definitely not surrender now that I've asked this question. Wait a moment. As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her palm, and the voice transmission talisman suddenly shot into the sky. It didn't take long for a group of cavaliers to charge out from the spatial rift in the sky above the sword sect. The Tang clan's cavaliers. There were a total of 16 of them. Moreover, there was a group of experts in tight black clothes and black longbows in their hands. There were a total of 9 of them. The expressions of the members of the sword sect changed when they witnessed this scene. It wasn't just the sword sect. Even Wu Wen and the others from Wu Yuan had extremely solemn expressions on their faces. There were a total of 37 extraordinary experts. Coupled with the armored figure by the eldest young Miss Tang's side, such a lineup. Even the joint forces of the sword sect of Wu Yuan might not be able to resist it. Has the Tang clan become so strong? Wu Wen's eyes were filled with deep worry. In the beginning, the sword sect of Wu Yuan felt that they were the top power in the chaotic universe. But now it seemed like the sword sect and Wu Yuan had fallen behind slightly. When they had the clone of their ancestor, the sword sect and Wu Yuan still had something to rely on. After all, the clone of their ancestor was extraordinarily heaven-defying, and it could be said that no matter how many came, they would die. But now, the clone of their ancestor was gone. Whether it was Wu Yuan or the sword sect, they had lost what could be considered their strongest trump card. When he thought up to here, Wu Wen sighed in a low voice. If the sword sect and the martial institution didn't have internal strife and joined forces, then who would dare to invade divine martial city with the clones of their ancestors present? But now, at this moment, he also felt danger. In the sky above the sword sect. As the Tang clan expert appeared, an invisible pressure instantly enveloped the entire sword sect. This was the suppression of strength. In the sky, Lady Tang looked at Yu Wuchen. I'll ask you again. Are you going to surrender or not? Yu Wuchen was about to speak when Mu Fengchen suddenly said, Lady Tang, do you believe that the treasure is not in the hands of the sword sect? Lady Tang looked at Mu Fengchen. It's not important. Mu Fengchen said solemnly, "It's very important. Lady Tang, I can guarantee you that if we fight today, the sword sect will give up everything and at least 90% of your experts will die. By then, how are you going to fight against Yi Xian? Or do you really think that swordsman is that simple?" That day, the Astral Lord gathered the experts from several starfields to attack Never-Ending Starfield. But what was the result? All the experts were killed, and even the Astral Lord's clone was killed. Have you never thought about this? Lady Tang shook her head. Sect Leader Mu, I don't care about Yi Xian now. I only want to ask you one question. Will the sword sect surrender or not? Mu Fengshen's face darkened when he heard that. He had wanted to divert Lady Tang's attention, but now it seemed that she wanted to destroy the sword sect. Or rather, she wanted to swallow the sword sect whole. He suddenly looked up at Lady Tang as if he had thought of something. Your target is not only the treasure but also the sword sect. You're wrong. Yu Wuchen spoke softly from the side. Their original objective was only that precious treasure. But the sword sect was stupid enough to fight Wu Yuan to the death. Not only did they fight to the death, but they also used their trump cards one after another. So, their target was not just the treasure. We gave her the chance. Now, not only does she want to devour my sword sect, she also wants that precious treasure. Comparing the sword sect to Yi Xian, she chose to get rid of us first because the sword sect is stronger than Yi Xian. After taking care of the sword sect, Yi Xian will be the only one left. It's easy to take care of them. Lady Tang smiled. The sword sect is truly stupid for not allowing you to be the sect master. As she spoke, she raised her right hand and was about to swing it. Meanwhile, Mu Fengchen suddenly said, "The sword sect is willing to work together with the Tang clan." As soon as he spoke, everyone looked at Mu Fengchen. Even Yu Wuchen looked at Mu Fengchen with disbelief in his eyes. Meanwhile, all the experts of the sword sect looked at Mu Fengchen as well. Everyone thought that they had heard wrong. Surrender? Mu Fengchen gazed at Miss Tang. The sword sect is willing to work together with the Tang clan. Miss Tang revealed a spurious smile. What kind of cooperation? Mu Fengchen was about to speak when Yu Wuchen spoke abruptly. Senior brother, do you know what you're saying? Mu Fengchen's expression was icy cold. Junior brother, do you really want the sword sect to vanish from this world? Yu Wuchen gazed at Mu Fengchen and remained silent. Mu Fengchen continued, the sword sect's 10,000 years of foundation can't be destroyed in our hands. Yu Wuchen shook his head. Do you know that if we kneel, the sword sect's 10,000 years of reputation will be destroyed in our hands? Not only will we be unable to raise our heads high, but the ancestors of the sword sect who created countless honors will die with everlasting regret. Moreover, if we kneel, the swordsman of the sword sect will become a sword in the hands of others. Would a sword without freedom and dignity still be sharp? Would we still rather break than bend? Mu Fengchen spoke fiercely, but are we going to let the sword sect vanish from this world? Anything is possible so long as we're alive. In any case, I don't want to let Yi Xian benefit from this. Yu Wuchen suddenly vanished. A ray of sword light instantly pierced through Mu Fengchen's head. Mu Fengchen's eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief. He never thought that this junior brother of his would suddenly attack. Everyone looked at Yu Wuchen in the air. Yu Wuchen spoke softly, "You're right. Anything is possible so long as we're alive. But if we have to live on our knees, then our sword sect would rather not have that. We, the swordsmen of the sword sect, can accept defeat, can accept death, but we will never live on our knees." As he spoke, he looked down. All disciples of the sword sect, heed my command. Even if our sword sect perishes, we will perish with dignity and dignity. Kill. Kill. Countless swordsmen's voices resounded like thunder in the sword sect. The sword sect directly attacked. P.S. I picked a few yesterday. One of them, I think his name is Mi Tang 512. I left you a message twice, but you kept asking for books every day. Are you a devil? Didn't you read your own comments? Once again, I thank all the readers. There are still 7 books left. These are the last 7 books. I hope everyone can keep a calm heart because there are many who don't have it. However, it doesn't mean there is no chance. No matter what, this event is a benefit for everyone. I hope everyone can be happy. That's why I won't sell them. If I sell them, the nature of the event will change. Also, I really read your comments one by one. It's just that some of the replies are slower. I thank all the readers. Especially the readers who are willing to spend money to support the original version. Chapter 553. Surrender? Yu Wuchen hadn't even considered that. Why couldn't he? Just as he'd said dignity, backbone, and if there was one more then it would be pride. Since the sword sect had existed until now, when had it ever lowered its head to its enemies? It hadn't in the past and it definitely wouldn't now. The reason Yu Wuchen had attacked Mu Fengchen was because Mu Fengchen wanted to lead the sword sect to kneel. He'd been able to tolerate Mu Fengchen earlier because even though Mu Fengchen had selfish motives, it was for the sake of the sword sect in the end, and he had the sword sect in his heart. But now, Mu Fengchen's actions were undoubtedly equivalent to betraying the sword sect. If the sword sect really surrendered, then the countless seniors of the sword sect would truly die with everlasting regret. Kill. Yu Wuchen led the charge towards the experts of the Tang clan. Meanwhile, the other swordsmen within the sword sect charged towards the experts of the Tang clan as well. At the same time, the sword sect activated all its sword formations. At this moment, the sword sect didn't dare hold back at all. They'd used all their trump cards. Sword formations appeared incessantly from the sword sect, and countless rays of light crisscrossed through the sky. For a time the sword sect actually had the upper hand. Of course it was mainly because of the sword sect's sword formations. Most of them had been left behind from thousands of years ago, and they could kill Dao realm experts with ease. Of course there was a flaw, and it was that it consumed a huge amount of energy. Every single sword formation consumed a huge amount of energy. But at this moment, the sword sect naturally wouldn't fuss about it since it was about to be annihilated. Tang clan's eldest young miss was expressionless in midair, and the armored man by her side didn't attack as well. Meanwhile, Elder Yuelao spoke solemnly, "Eldest young miss, will suffer heavy losses if this continues." She fell silent. Elder Yuelao continued, "Should we send another group of experts over?" She glanced coldly at him. "Why don't we send all the experts of the Tang clan over?" Yuelao hesitated for a moment and then he said, "But if this goes on, it will be disadvantageous to us." Miss Tang looked at the armored man beside her. "Stall that sword, Saint." The armored man nodded. In the next moment he appeared in front of Yu Wuchen. Boom. An explosion suddenly resounded. The eldest daughter of the Tang family said again, "Attack." Yuelao and the rest also rushed out. Sword rise. Meanwhile, a voice suddenly resounded from below the sword sect. In the next moment, the swords in the hands of countless disciples of the sword sect shot into the sky. In the air, a dozen or so Tang clan cavalrymen suddenly stood in a row, raised their sabers and slashed down. Chi-chi, a wave of saber light slashed down, and in an instant, a series of tearing sounds resounded above the sword sect. However, there were people dying in the sword sect every second. Archers. The arrows of the 9 archers could be said to have never missed their targets. Besides the Dao realm experts, the other experts of the sword sect couldn't stop their arrows at all. However, some of the experts of the Tang clan had fallen as well, and 5 Tang clan cavalrymen had fallen. The combat strength of the swordsmen of the sword sect wasn't to be underestimated. Especially when coupled with the sword formation, even the Tang clan cavalrymen found it difficult to resist. Overall, the Tang clan held the advantage. Wu Yuan. He Liantian spoke in a low voice by Wu Wen's side. "The sword sect probably won't be able to hold on for much longer." Wu Wen spoke in a low voice, "If the sword sect is annihilated." He Liantian gazed at Wu Wen, "Master." Wu Wen spoke softly, "The eldest daughter of the Tang clan is extremely ambitious. If that precious treasure isn't in the hands of the sword sect, then who will she deal with? Yi Xian, of course. Although Yi Xian isn't from Wu Yuan, he's inextricably linked to Wu Yuan. At that time, it's extremely likely that she'll use this as an excuse to deal with our martial arts institution. At that time, how will Wu Yuan resist the Tang clan?" He Liantian spoke in a low voice, "Master, you mean to help the sword sect? But if we do that, it's no different from declaring war on the Tang clan." Wu Wen looked in the direction of the sword sect. "Without the lips, the teeth will be interdependent. Regardless of whether we offend them or not, they will definitely target Wu Yuan." As he spoke up to this point, he slowly clenched his right hand. "Pass down my order, all the experts of Wu Yuan are to support the sword sect." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure shook, and he directly charged in the direction of the sword sect. He Liantian hesitated for a moment, and then hurriedly followed. Soon the experts of Wu Yuan rushed towards the sword sect. Wu Wen was very clear that this Tang family Missy's ambition was too great. With the sword sect gone, her next target would most likely be Wu Yuan. At that time no one would help Wu Yuan. In the sky above the sword sect. As the experts of Wu Yuan joined in, the situation instantly changed. especially when Wu Yuan also activated the formation and began to target the Tang clan's knights. In the sky, Tang family Missy's face turned extremely ugly. She did not hesitate. Everyone retreat. Soon all the experts of Tang clan retreated out of Shenwu City. As for the sword sect and Wu Yuan experts, they did not chase. Both sides faced off in the sky. Tang family Missy stared at Wu Wen and asked, "What is the meaning of Wu Yuan?" Wu Wen spoke indifferently, "This Shenwu City is not Tang clan's territory. Please leave with your people." The corner of Tang family Missy's mouth lifted slightly. It was a cold smile. What a great Wu Yuan. Speaking up to hear, her expression suddenly became somewhat ferocious. I think Wu Yuan wants to be buried with the sword sect. With that, she opened her palm, and a transmission talisman suddenly soared into the sky. In Shenwu City, Yu Wuchen appeared beside Wu Wen. His expression was rather complicated. Brother Wu Wen spoke softly, let's not talk about the past. What's important now is to get through this together. Yu Wuchen nodded slightly. The two looked into the distance. Obviously, this Tang family Missy had called for reinforcements again. Soon, another group of cavalry appeared in the sky above the sword sect. A total of 20 people. Not only that, there were also 2 giant apes the size of a small mountain. The moment these 2 giant apes appeared, the entire sky directly trembled as if there was an earthquake. It was incomparably frightening. At this time, Lady Tang suddenly looked at the spatial crack and said coldly, "My good brother, why are you so stingy? Can't you give me a bit more in one go?" At this time, an illusory man suddenly appeared at the spatial crack. The illusory man looked down at Tang family Missy. "This is already the limit that the family can give you. If you fail this time, my good sister, you will be sitting on the bench." With that said, he turned around and disappeared. Lady Tang's expression was cold. She did not expect Wu Yuan to suddenly attack. This time, she had forced herself into a desperate situation. Outstanding Tang family children can mobilize a portion of the Tang family knights, but there is one requirement, and that is, it must bring benefits to the family. As long as it brings benefits to the family, anything is negotiable. But if the cost exceeds the return, then the problem will be huge. She has no way out now. Because a few Tang family knights have died, it is not easy to train these knights. It can be said that each of them is cultivated with a huge amount of resources. Of course, if she can take down the sword sect, Wu Yuan, and that supreme treasure, even if all the Tang family knights die, it will be worth it. Thinking of this, her face gradually turned cold. She looked at the Shenwu city, and just when she was about to speak, Wu Wen suddenly said, "Let the Tang family see our Wu Yuan's trump card. Let's show them our trump card." Behind him, He Liantian suddenly turned around and disappeared. After a few breaths, a powerful aura suddenly soared into the sky from the Wu Yuan, and then a super stone statue appeared in front of everyone. This super stone statue was twice the size of the giant ape. Not only that, but in the Wu Yuan, 3 white-haired old men suddenly appeared, but all 3 of them are soul bodies. Martial Saint. Seeing these 3 people, Lady Tang's face turned extremely ugly. At this time, Yu Wuchen suddenly said, "Attack." As soon as his voice fell, 18 swords suddenly flew out from the sword tomb in the back mountain of the sword sect. Soon, the 18 swords hovered above the sword sect. Each sword is actually at the fortune realm. Most importantly, every single one of these swords contained a powerful sword Dao will. These swords were once the swords of the ancestors of the sword sect. No matter where they are, as long as they have no successor, their swords will return to the sword sect. And the ancestors of the sword sect used these powerful swords to create a sword array. This can be said to be the last trump card of the sword sect. After the 18 swords appeared, a monstrous sword aura directly enveloped Lady Tang. The armored expert of the Tang family suddenly stood in front of Lady Tang, and not only that, the Tang family iron cavalry also stood in front of Lady Tang. Danger. This was what all the experts of the Tang family felt at this moment. On the other hand, Lady Tang's expression was calm. She glanced at the 18 swords, then looked at Yu Wuchen. If I'm not mistaken, these 18 swords can only be used once, right? Yu Wuchen's face was expressionless. Even if it can only be used once, I can still spare your life. As Lady Tang said, this sword array can only be used once. The reason why these 18 swords are so powerful is that they contain the sword will of the sword sect's experts. Once activated, these sword wills will disappear, and at that time, these swords will become pure fortune realm artifacts. Lady Tang sneered, "You want to take my life? Aren't you being too confident?" Yu Wuchen said indifferently, These 18 swords contain the sword will of 18 transcendent sword saints, as well as 18 super sword arrays. Once activated, even gods and ghosts can kill them, let alone you? If you don't believe me, the old man can let you have a try now. Lady Tang was about to speak, but at this time, the armored man beside her suddenly said, "Unstoppable." Lady Tang looked at the armored man and he said again, "Unstoppable." Hearing this, Lady Tang's face sank. Not far away, Wu Wen suddenly said, "Lady Tang, the old man can't say for sure that he will win, but if Wu Yuan and the sword sect join hands, even if you can win, it will be a Pyrrhic victory. At least 80% of the people you brought with you will die here, maybe even all of them. At that time, Wu Yuan and the sword sect will perish together, and you will get nothing. As for the experts of the Tang family, I believe that you won't dare to come to Shenwu City with your entire army. You also have enemies, right?" After a moment of silence, Lady Tang said, "Retreat." After that, she turned around and left with the experts of the Tang family. But not long after, she suddenly stopped and turned to look at the direction of Shenwu City. If it's just Wu Yuan and the sword sect, the Tang family naturally won't pay such a big price to deal with you. But if Wu Yuan and the sword sect have that treasure. Speaking of this, the corner of her mouth slightly lifted. Wu Wen said in a deep voice, "You know that the treasure is with Yi Xian." Lady Tang shook her head. "No, it's not with Yi Xian, it's with you." Hearing this, Wu Wen and Yu Wuchen's faces turned ugly. At this time, Lady Tang said again, "Young Master Yi, I know you are in the dark. I will tell you this, the door of the Tang family will always be open to you. You are welcome to join us, haha." Chapter 554. Soon, Miss Tang disappeared with the Tang clan's powerhouses. Wu Wen and Yu Wuchen heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts when they saw this scene. Because if the young miss of the Tang family didn't leave, then there would only be one outcome, and that would be mutual destruction. Whether it was Wu Yuan or the sword sect, they did not want to be destroyed together. In the dark, Yi Xian looked in the direction Miss Tang left and said softly, "That woman is really sinister." The words that this woman had said before she left were actually meant to sow discord. To sow discord between him and Wu Yuan as well as the sword sect. Needless to say, the sword sect and Wu Yuan would definitely be on guard against him now. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian turned around and disappeared quietly. Plotting against him? Not a chance. In the sky above the sword sect, Yu Wuchen looked at Wu Wen and said softly, "Brother Wu Wen, what my sword sect did to Wu Yuan?" Wu Wen shook his head. "Let's not talk about the past. Now that you are in charge of the sword sect, I hope that both sides can put down all grudges and face everything together." He knew very well that Wu Yuan and sword sect did not have their strongest trump card. If both sides did not join forces, Shenwu City would definitely change hands. Yu Wuchen nodded. "Brother Wu Wen, put it down. From today onwards, my sword sect and Wu Yuan will live and die together." Live and die together. Whether it was Wu Wen or Yu Wuchen, both knew very well that the sword sect and Wu Yuan were interdependent. Whoever died, the other side would not have a good ending. And if both sides joined forces, then any force that wanted to destroy them would have to pay a terrible price. At this moment, Yu Wuchen suddenly said softly, "What Miss Tang said before she left? Sowing discord." Wu Wen said solemnly, "That woman hoped that we would target Yi Xian, or rather, she did not want Yi Xian to stand on our side." Yi Xian. Yu Wuchen's expression was rather complicated. In fact, if he could turn back time, he would have chosen to directly suppress Mu Fengchen and his grandson. However, he had his concerns at that time. First, if he tried to suppress Mu Fengchen and his grandson, it might lead to an internal strife in the sword sect. After all, Mu Fengchen and his grandson had been running the sword sect for many years. They had absolute authority in the sect. Moreover, at that time he somewhat agreed with what Mu Fengchen and his grandson had done. If Yi Xian were to stay in the sword sect, it would not be a good thing for the sword sect. However, he did not expect that Mu Fengchen and his granddaughter would try to kill Yi Xian after chasing him away, and would even be stupid enough to snatch the treasure. This was something he hadn't expected. When he found out, everything was set in stone. Wu Wen suddenly said, "We cannot have any dealings with this Yi Xian." Yu Wuchen looked at Wu Wen. "Brother Wu Wen, isn't this exactly what the Tang family's eldest daughter wants?" Wu Wen shook his head. "There's no other way. Yi Xian is a whirlpool. If he is in the divine martial city, he will bring more troubles. Because with him around, those people will definitely target our Wu Yuan and the sword sect at all costs. But without him, if they want to target us again, they will have to first ask if it's worth it." Yu Wuchen said solemnly, his sister and friends are in Wuyin, those people? Speaking up to this point, his heart suddenly jolted. Mentality. He realized that after he took charge of the sword sect, his mentality had changed. He admired Yi Xian a lot, this was something he had never concealed. But after he took charge of the sword sect, he realized that between Yi Xian and the sword sect, he would subconsciously choose the sword sect. For the sake of the sword sect, he would even have some thoughts that he once disdained. For example, asking Yi Xian, his friends, and his sister to leave the divine martial city. Although this thought was fleeting, it still appeared. Yu Wuchen looked in the direction of the sword sect's sword tomb with a complicated gaze. In the past, he was the most talented person in the sword sect and also the strongest. But the previous sword sect master, who was also his master, had passed the sect master position to Mu Fengqian. He couldn't figure out why this was happening. He even had some resentment in the past. But now he finally understood. His master not passing the position to him was actually for his own good. If he took charge of the sword sect, he might not be able to break through to Transcendent Sword Saint in his lifetime. As a sect master, no matter what he did, he had to be overcautious. And this kind of mentality would definitely affect the sword Dao. At this time, Wu Wen suddenly said, "I'll go talk to him." Yu Wuchen retracted his thoughts and looked at Wu Wen. "Will he cooperate with you?" Wu Wen said softly, "Yes. Because he values his friends and sister very much, for them, he will definitely cooperate. Also, Brother Yu, from now on, whether it is your sword sect or my Win, we need to maintain 120% vigilance, to prevent that woman's sudden attack." Yu Wuchen nodded, "Understood. I have already ordered all the sword sect disciples outside to rush back." There were a few swordsmen in the sword sect who were actually outside to gain experience, and among these people, there was no lack of Dao realm experts. However, some of the swordsmen had left the sect for a very long time, some even more than 100 years, and it was unknown whether these people were still alive or dead. But as long as they were not dead, these swordsmen would definitely rush back. Soon, Wu Wen left with Wu Yuan and the other experts, and the sword sect returned to peace. Of course, the hearts of the swordsmen were not at peace. The current sword sect was in a mess. This time, the sword sect could be said to have suffered heavy losses. Not only were there only 6 Dao realm experts left, but the sword sect had also lost half of its savings. It could be said that the sword sect did not dare to activate the sword formation without restraint anymore. This was because every single sword formation consumed a lot of energy. At this moment, Yu Wuchen suddenly said, "Bury those who sacrificed themselves. Apart from that, no one is allowed to leave Xinwu City from now on." As he spoke, he looked at Mu Fengqian's corpse with a complicated gaze. "Bury him well as well." With that, he turned around and walked towards the sword tomb. As the Tang clan's experts retreated, the entire Xinwu city gradually calmed down. However, the entire Xinwu city had become a little empty. The battle between the sword sect and Wu Yuan had caused a group of people to leave, and the invasion of the Tang clan's experts had caused the few remaining people in Xinwu city to leave. No one dared to stay in Xinwu city. They were all afraid of being implicated. Outside Xinwu city in a mountain range, the Tang clan's Missy sat cross-legged on the ground. Not far from her stood a group of knights, and beside her was the armored man. After a long time, the Tang clan's Missy opened her eyes. She stood up and looked at Xinwu city with a cold gaze. Yuelao said in a deep voice, "Missy, what should we do now?" "What should we do?" The Tang clan's Missy narrowed her eyes. "What do you think we should do now?" Yuelao shook his head. "Now that Wu Yuan and Sword Sect have joined forces, if the clan does not send experts over, I'm afraid more than 90% of us will die even if we take over Xinwu City." The Tang clan's Missy shook her head. "The clan will not send experts over." Yuelao frowned slightly. "Why?" The Tang clan's Missy said indifferently, "Because someone in the clan has an opinion. The people we have are more than enough to seize that treasure." Yuelao asked, "Give up Xinwu City?" The Tang clan's Missy didn't say anything. Yuelao said again, "Missy, that treasure is really in the hands of that Yi Xian?" The Tang clan's Missy said softly, "Most likely. We have been fooled by this person since the beginning. Not only us but the sword sect has also been fooled by him. This person is not only powerful but his intelligence is also not low." Yuelao nodded. "This person is not like a swordsman. And now he is hiding in the dark, we can't do anything to him. The only way is to attack Wu Yuan, but Wu Yuan has joined forces with the sword sect." Speaking up to here, his face darkened. Now he realized that they really could not do anything to this Yi Xian. The Tang clan's Missy also fell silent. The current her was extremely angry. Originally she could take down the sword sect and then deal with Yi Xian. By then not only could she deal with Yi Xian, she could also take down Wu Yuan. Unfortunately, Wu Yuan suddenly helped the sword sect and ruined all her plans. Especially that Yi Xian, he was extremely cunning. Once he saw that the situation was not good, he immediately fled. After a while, the Tang clan's Missy suddenly said, "Go contact the star regions that attacked Never-Ending Star region." Yuelao hesitated, then said, "I'm afraid they don't have the guts to come again." Lady Tang said indifferently, "I don't believe that they don't want revenge." Yuelao nodded slightly, "Old man, go and try." With that he turned and left. Lady Tang looked at Yilan beside her, "Help me contact some people?" After a while Yilan also turned and left. Lady Tang looked in the direction of Divine Martial City, "Then I'll play with you." Yi Xian. Speaking up to hear, her eyes gradually turned cold. Wu Yuan. In the martial arts hall, Yi Xian stood quietly. Not far in front of him were Wu Wen and He Liantian. Wu Wen glanced at Yi Xian, "Little friend Yi, you should know why the old man sent you here, right?" Yi Xian smiled, "Senior Wu Wen wants me to leave?" Wu Wen nodded, "You must leave. My Wu Yuan cannot withstand the Tang clan and countless other forces' attacks." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "If I leave they will still come to Wu Yuan to find me." Wu Wen looked at Yi Xian, "You should know what to do." Yi Xian smiled. Of course he knew what to do. He couldn't hide. He had to keep showing himself to attract the Tang clan's attention, then lead them somewhere else. As long as he showed himself, the Tang clan would definitely look for him, and they wouldn't pay a huge price to target Wu Yuan and the sword sect. To put it bluntly, he had to go out and attract their attention. Wu Wen said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, we have no other choice." Yi Xian smiled, "Take good care of my sister and my friends. I don't want Wu Yuan to hand them over for self-protection. If that's the case, then I can take them and leave now." He still had the prison pagoda. Naturally he could take them and leave, but that would be very dangerous, very dangerous. If something happened to him, everyone would die. Wu Yuan looked straight at Yi Xian, "Don't worry, my Wu Yuan will never betray them for self-protection." Yi Xian nodded, "I will remember Senior's words." The Senior goes back on his words. "I will kill everyone in Wu Yuan at all costs. If Senior keeps his words, I will stand on Wu Yuan's side at all costs, and attract everyone's hatred at all costs." After saying that he turned and left. When he reached the door he suddenly stopped and said, "Tell my sister, her brother won't let anyone harm a single hair on her. If anyone does, then I, Yi Xian, will die." After saying that he walked out. P.S. Because there are 4 readers who didn't come to me for their books, I have decided to draw a new one. Because there are only 6 books, I will only pick the handsome ones. Let me see how many readers can be mentioned in the same breath as me in terms of appearance. Those handsome readers who only read books and vote, you can't keep a low profile anymore. Come out. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.